What's up, my fellow ambitious poker players, and welcome to the Mechanics of Poker podcast, in which me, Rene, aka The Wacko, and Adam Carmichael deconstruct high-stakes poker players, figuring out what it is about them, how they think, what they do that makes them so successful, with an extra focus on the obstacles they faced and the skills they had to develop to surpass them. This podcast is brought to you by Poker Ambition. If you are ambitious about making more progress in your poker career, go over to their site, pokerambition.com, and find out which service is best for you. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hi there, my fellow ambitious poker players. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Mechanics of Poker podcast, in which today we are going to have a chat with high-stakes poker player Uri Peleg, very often recommended guest. Uri was mentioned by various other podcast guests as a guy who had a very big impact on their poker career, so that made us very curious to have him on. He has years of experience playing high-stakes poker and also coaching in high-stakes poker. It took him around 5 to 6 years to get to these stakes, and today we will walk you guys through the path that led him there. Starting at an early age, being very competitive in games. In this case, I think it was Magic the Gathering, which I think is starting to become a little bit of a tale of successful poker players, Adam. They all seem to have excelled in either games or sports before they became a successful poker player.
Yeah, I'd say it's a common trend that we're starting to pick up from these interviews. And yeah, he's definitely on the elite side of the gamers, got to like a really, really high level in many games. And then, yeah, transitioned that into having a successful poker career. Like you mentioned, he's been very highly recommended. To be honest, I don't know much about his background story. So I'm really intrigued to know how he's been able to have success in poker. I know he's an outside the box thinker who a lot of players respect for his ability to come with complex strategies and simplify those in a good way. So yeah, really intrigued to see where this conversation goes and bringing out Uri's story for the audience.
All right, let's have Uri on. All right, there he is, Uri Peleg. Thank you for being on the pod.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Oh, well, we had no choice, to be honest, because everyone keeps on talking about you in the podcast. The comments have been shouting Uri. So it also made us very curious. Like, we have never met before. We've never spoken before. Obviously, I've heard about you. I've heard about Guerrilla Poker, your coaching site. So yeah, obviously a lot of respect. So let's dive into your story. Very curious about it. I wanted to start off at the beginning. You are not new to being a big winner in games, because you mentioned that when you were, I think, 13 years old, you became world champion in Magic the Gathering. I actually played some Magic the Gathering when I was younger as well, but never got further than playing against my friends. So I'm curious, how does one become a world champion in Magic the Gathering when they are 13 years old? Can you walk us through the childhood you had?
Okay, so I'll start with a fact correction. I was world champion when I was 24 years old. 13 years old is when I started playing Magic.
Okay.
I wish I'd been world champion. And actually, when I was in school at the age of 13, they had us fill in on this piece of paper, like, how do you imagine the rest of your life at various ages? And I filled in that at age 21, I would be the world champion in Magic. So I'm actually 3 years late compared to but yeah, I was thinking about it at age 13.
A law of attraction.
Yeah, no, I've been in strategy games as long as I can remember myself. Kind of the first strategy game story I have is probably when I was 6 or 7 years old. I was playing Connect 4. You guys know that game? Mm-hmm. I was playing Connect 4 with my mother, and she did this thing where there are 3 next to each other, and then any move you make, you're going to lose the next move. If I don't know if you guys know what I mean, but
I know.
And I was shocked because I couldn't find a way to stop her winning, and I asked her, how did you do that? And she told me how she did it, and ever since she told me, she never won a game that we played for the rest of our lives. because I had suddenly I had a goal, I had a strategy, and then I was all the time directing the game into making these kind of situations. I was being deceptive about it, like I would distract her in other places in the board. I always knew kind of what I was aiming at. So yeah, I think yeah, that's kind of when I started strategy games. Um, I started playing Magic when I was 13. Was also playing a bunch of other computer strategy games the whole time with friends. Um, in Magic, I kind of got into the tournament scene in Israel. I think I went to my first world championship when I was 14 years old. I finished third in the national championship and kind of kept going. I was playing Magic all the time, thinking about it all the time. Kind of like a lot of guys describe with poker. I didn't have that with poker. I had that with a different game, where I was dreaming about it, playing all day, not doing anything else. Um, and there's actually, I know I'm very nonlinear with storytelling, but that I actually won the Magic World Championship after I'd already retired from playing Magic.
Oh wow.
And I think that has to do with mental game a lot, because I'd always punt really big in international tournaments because of all the stress. And that year, because I was already retired, I was just going for fun because I was qualified. So there was no pressure, and suddenly I was able to play really, really well.
You still see that happening today, for example, in poker. For example, we actually had a guest on previously. We also talked about he spews the most when he's not happy in life. And we kind of talked about it's a sort of self sabotage, right? You spew off because you don't want to be there. Is that something you sometimes see in your poker game as well when you're not happy around poker, that you notice you spew more?
Um, yes, yes. I often say, I always think my win rate is the average of two players. One is like a 15 BB winner, and the other is a 10 BB loser, maybe, or an 8 BB loser. And I vary between playing one or the other version of myself a lot, and a lot of improving for me is recognizing when and how to deal, like how to recognize that I shouldn't be playing right now, um, and how to, like, part of the issue with this is that when you're in a mode when you shouldn't be playing, your brain isn't working as well, so it's tougher to stop playing, it's tougher to think, and often I'll see the signs there, but I'm not in control enough to actually stop. So this is like definitely a very big challenge for me throughout my whole career, is dealing with these kind of ups and downs. Like, uh, even as a coach, I can't tell you guys how many times a student has come to me and he said, "Look, Uri, I think I want to quit poker. I've been losing the last 3 months. I don't care about the game anymore." And I always ask them, like, what's up in your personal life? And it's always like, I broke up with my girlfriend 3 months ago. My grandmother died. Like, there's always something there that kind of shifts them off track. And it can be a really vicious circle for people. I'm sure you guys know of this, where when the train goes off the track, it can take a while to get back on track in that sense.
Yeah, I think also in coaching, I've done a lot of coaching as well. Like if your students are the train, right, and you try to lay down a track for them to follow, it's not that you're trying to prevent them from getting off track, because they will get off track. I think the key is realizing that you're off track faster than before and course correcting back to the normal track faster than before, right? Instead of being off rail for like 3-4 months, being off rail for only 2 months is huge progress.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And always, in the CFP that we have, we always tell people, like, if you're on a downswing, you get as much coaching as you need. Like, that's when you need the help the most to get yourself back in the right mindset.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to help those people more, right? And then the people who are doing well, okay, yeah, we will compensate you when you are not doing so well. I think it's also interesting what you mentioned, that especially, I mean, I don't really want to throw labels, but you're more of an exploitative player. You mentioned that you're either plus 15 or minus 10. And I see that in general, if you have a more exploitative approach, which I have as well, and I have a good friend of me who has that even to a more extreme. Uh, yeah, you're just sometimes do something genius, but it's a thin line between doing something genius and spewing off completely. So if you're really in the mood, you're indeed just making genius plays always. But if you're not in that right state of mind, you're just spewing off. Is that kind of what you were describing with either being plus 15 BB or minus 10 BB, where someone who's more GTO will play a more consistent game, which is more average?
The best exploitative player that I know, who's not me, I have a friend who's a lot better at it than I am. He had the most massive sharp downswings I've ever seen in a professional player in my life, because he had such a range in his play where he could do such crazy sick things. And if your brain is not calibrated correctly, if you're not in the right mental state, and you go for the I'll check shove the river with complete air against your overbet, but you do it without the correct cues and without the correct information, suddenly you're just a massive spew whale, right? You're just playing terrible. And very often when I'm not in a good state of mind, what I find is that I'm making exploitative adjustments too quickly and too sharply. Whereas if I were playing GTO, there is not that kind of range in my game. I will just get to a spot, I'll RNG, maybe I'll pick the wrong combo, so I'll lose one big blind, but you'll never see I do some crazy shit when I play. I can be completely off the rails. So, call you down for 600 big blinds with ace high. I can double float air to raise river. Everything's in there. So if I'm not playing well, it can get bad really, really fast.
Yeah, and then it's also you then try to force it, I guess, right? It then comes less natural. That if you're in a good flow, the plays come intuitive. Whereas else you're trying to, okay, I have to make these good plays, and then you're just trying to force and create spots that basically aren't really spots.
Yeah, when I'm in a good mood, I'm just playing and the spots come to me. When I'm in a bad state of mind, I'm more looking for the spots. I'm like, okay, I know this worked well last time. I'm more reactive to the situation. Like my last bluff he caught, so I'm not gonna bluff this time. Everything is a lot more emotional. It's a lot less nuanced and connected, and I might be reacting to someone's timing, even though it's not it's tough to say. Like the brain puts 1 and 2 and 3 together often in ways which we're not consciously aware of. So if you try to rationalize everything when you're an exploitative player, you're just going to get a bunch of stuff wrong, I think, because there's too much information to process in the amount of time you have to make a decision. So if you want to be aggressive, you can find reasons to be aggressive. I actually have a kind of a new habit I'm working on, because I'm a bit of a calling station in poker. So what often happens to me with a long time bank is I'll get to the river, the guy will make a big bet. My first instinct is, okay, I have to fold. Then I'll start time banking, I'll think about it, and in the last 5 seconds, I'll convince myself to call somehow. So yeah, I'm not allowing myself to do that anymore. Like if the decision is fold, even if I really want to call, I'm more disciplined. I won't kind of get sucked into.
Or you take your bias in consideration in your decision making. I say this to my students as well. So if you see a spot, for example, you get a hero folder and a hero caller, right? These are their main tendency, and you have them look at the same spot. They will focus on the reasons to call, the other one will focus on the reasons to fold. So then I say, okay, you guys you don't have to change everything you know about poker. It's just you have to take in consideration with bias. So if you think it's a close call, but your calling station is probably a fold. So it's close call, but I'm biased, so I'm a fold. And same for the other guy. So how do we then close the gap between these ranges, right, of game? You already mentioned GTO, for example. If you are very blocker oriented, you stay within a certain range, right? You're never going to go too out of line because you only pick a good blocker at a certain frequency. Whereas I've certainly been guilty of, well, this guy's just going to fold, so I have the worst blocker possible. I don't care. It's going to go in, right? How do we then close the gap? Is then GTO the way to close the gap?
So I want to first add another thing to what you were saying about biases. I think people have an emotional bias with hands. So I always say, if you have trips or you have an overpair and you're not sure about calling or folding, then definitely fold. Well, if you have ace high or bottom pair and you're not sure, then definitely call. I think that's also kind of a bias correction heuristic. That's worked fairly well for me. Although it's tough to fold trips, right? Like even if you know that, it's still tough. But yeah, I think knowing GTO helps for sure, because but also limits you. Like the more you know GTO, the easier it is to excuse a bad play. Sorry to call GTO a bad play, but often people will make like a terrible bluff or a terrible call, and they know it's bad, but they know that they get to make it 30% of the time, and they'll be okay. Like, this is GTO, it can't be too bad. And like I think from hearing you speak, we agree that there are calls that GTO would make that are massively losing calls. So I think it can go both way with GTO, and I do have friends who, when they're tilted, they tell me I play more GTO when I'm tilted. Like I use GTO as an excuse to bluff or to call or to fold, rather than listening to like what I know about the game that is beyond and deeper and more practical than GTO. They start to ignore that, and they just, like, knowing both, you can have an excuse for any decision you want to make, right? You can call for an exploitative reason, or you can call for a GTO reason. You always, I don't think GTO really protects you in that sense, unless you play pure GTO, which I think is a terrible idea, unless you're a super genius. Like, you know, some guys can pull it off and be the best in the world. Like Linus, Phil Galfond, Doug Polk, maybe. Like some guys can study GTO and just be the best in the world at doing that. But I think for most people, trying to mimic GTO is not a very good idea.
Yeah, and the frequencies in a solver are also very biased, right? Bias sensitive. Something is a frequency 50-50. If you're in general a guy who gives up more, you will find a reason, this time no. And the guy who always wants to bluff sees it as, 50-50. That means I can bluff this. And then will basically always bluff this. So again, it's very bias sensitive. I also always like it when people start a hand history where they start with a very exploitative reason on the flop, right? They say, I oversee bet this flop because it's going to overfold, and then they arrive to the river, they face a bet, and they say, well, now I have a GTO frequency call. I'm like, wait, but the range that he now arrived at on the river is different, because I always say when you enter the exploit tree, right, when you hop on the exploit train on the earlier street, you cannot suddenly make a GTO reasoning on the later street, right?
I actually had an interesting conversation with a friend about that yesterday. He was in a multi-way pot, and one of the guys was a calling station. So he told me, okay, I'm never bluffing because he's a calling station, so I'll check my value hands to be balanced. And I was like, that's not how exploitative poker works. If you're never bluffing because he's a calling station, you don't check. That doesn't seem right. So yeah, it's very easy to confuse. And also, like, the 50% river, like you said, has to do with the range you arrive at the river with. And very often you're making a frequency mistake on earlier streets. So really the frequency there doesn't have anything to do with optimal play or not getting there with the correct range. Almost nobody is. So you're kind of deluding yourself in a way. I still think it's even a nice mental safety net to randomize sometimes. But yeah, agree with what you said 100%.
Actually, that's interesting that you said. I've been recently trying to implement that as well as a mental safety net, and also to prevent your bias, that if I really don't have a good reason, that I at least do it 50-50, right? I really cannot figure this out. I'll do it 50-50, so my bias cannot unconsciously override me.
And then you get less tilted as well, I think, if you lose, because you're like, okay, I was only doing it 50-50, so it's okay to call and lose. Well, if you play pure exploit, I think the times you lose hurt a bit more than if you randomize.
Yeah, actually, I had this question written down for later, but hey, we're talking about that now. Indeed, like I think exploitative play is harder on the mental game because if you're wrong, you were wrong. It's very personal. Whereas people who are
You
way
were
more
wrong,
solver
yeah.
approach, they say, well, the solver told me to do this. So you basically put responsibility in the hand of the solver. Well, the solver said it was a call. So I take no responsibility in the fact that I now made a bad call, right? Whereas exploitatively, you make a bluff because you think it's a good bluff, and the guy calls you with a hand that he should never call, that means you made a terrible bluff, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and variance is really deceptive, especially with bluff catching, because you might make a bluff catch that's not GTO because you think the guy is over bluffing the spot. He just shows you the nuts. It's a huge pot. How are you going to feel? You're never going to know if you were correct or not. And if you just play GTO, you would be like, okay, like this is how the spot plays. He has his range, I have my range, I played fine. But if you're making like, sometimes on the river, I have a bluff catcher, I'm not randomizing 40%. I'm 0 or 100. Like I'm thinking and making the decision. So yeah, it's a lot more personal. It's a lot more sensitive to tilt in A game, B game, C game. It's a different world. I think it fits a different personality of player as well. But like to me, this is poker. I don't think if you want to do the GTO memorization, you should be playing a different game. In my eyes, like you should play chess, some game where I don't know. It's less about personality, more about analysis. If you want to just perform GTO solutions.
You mentioned chess as well, and you also mentioned before that you were playing Hearthstone on top of Magic the Gathering. How does GTO and exploitative play? How does that look in? You also mentioned chess, right? If you want to play more GTO, play chess. How do GTO plays, exploitative plays look like in Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, chess?
It's an interesting question. So each of these games is super different, even though they are similar. I think both chess and Magic the Gathering are games where there is a lot less hidden information than there is in poker. So very often there are clearly very good plays and very bad plays. It's not, you don't need to know your opponent's range as much. So it's a lot more about seeing a situation and analyzing it correctly and coming up with a good game plan. In terms of GTO and exploitative, I would say, maybe an exploitative approach to the games would be to bank on your opponents making mistakes rather than assuming they react correctly. And very often that will open avenues for you to win, which wouldn't exist if they played correctly. But there is a lot less room for exploitative play in those games. It's more about I think all three of those games, they have two elements. There's the play itself, which is just looking at the board, analyzing, making a good decision, and very often everyone will agree what is the correct decision. There won't be different approaches. Like there's too much information for good players to really argue. But a lot of the creativity in those games actually comes into the preparation and the decisions that you make before you start playing. So in Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering, and maybe to a degree chess, you are actually, like Magic the Gathering is a game where there are over 10,000 different cards, and each player constructs the deck of cards he's going to the tournament with. And I think in the deck construction, so before you start playing, when you're preparing the cards and the strategy, that's where there is room for exploitative strategy, for guessing what your opponents are going to be doing and how to counter it and how they might try to counter you. And all those kinds of things happen before you sit down to play in these games.
And do you know the other player's deck?
No. You don't know his and he doesn't know yours. You can sometimes guess because there are like the deck that won the previous tournament. So you have some information what people are likely to play. But yeah, I think my big strength in Magic the Gathering has always been in this aspect. So in terms of, if there's technical play in Magic the Gathering, I was maybe top 100 in the world. But when it came to the strategy that you make before you play, preparing the deck in a way that's good for the people you're playing against, I was probably top 5 in the world.
So it was mainly in the anticipating of what your opponent is going to do that kind of made you construct your deck, and maybe in poker play your hand a certain way. I don't know, you set a certain trap on the flop because you know how he's going to anticipate, right? What he's going to do on later street. That gives you the exploitative edge.
I think it's also about understanding which cards and which strategies work together, what kind of synergies there are in the game. Synergy, I don't know if the synergy applies to poker, but in Magic, very often you're trying to, in Hearthstone as well, you're trying to use your cards together. So how you use them, what is effective against one strategy or the other, what isn't effective. I can tell you guys a story from actually the championship that I won in the quarterfinals. I was playing against a genius player from Japan, Katsuhiro Mori, a much more successful player than I was. He was a previous world champion and he went like back to back top 4 in the world year after year in this format. And he was a lot sharper technically than I was. But I was outmaneuvering him in all the strategic aspects as we were playing, like by a huge margin. And these two things, that they're both part of it, right? Both part of your success. So in poker, if you think about when you're playing, like there's so much information to think about my range and his range and the timing and the board and the positions and everything is shifting. Maybe you think about your opponent's mood. So some people are able to do these things really well. I have, a friend who was one of, a high stakes cash game player for years and years. He never touched a solver. He had like huge leaks all over his game, but he was just really, really sharp and really thinking fast and adjusting on his feet. And he managed to stay successful at the highest levels with no theory background whatsoever. While obviously if you take that guy and you give him a good theory background, he would do a lot better, obviously. So yeah, I think my strength has always been developing good strategies, good exploitative strategies specifically, to counter what's currently going on. Adjusting to player types well in terms of game plan, simplifying solver outputs, understanding kind of what is and what isn't important. And then in the end, you give that to someone, he has to implement it. Some guys are super good at that. Some guys are a lot slower. Each one needs his own kind of game plan. Sometimes some of the best players I know start talking about, like, I have ace of clubs, queen of spades. These are the absolute best suits to triple barrel bluff with on this random board. And I like, my brain is not capable of understanding that in game. I don't think that deep.
You just think like, is this guy a guy who's going to fold? Yes. Okay, I'll pull the trigger regardless of my suits.
Yeah, I'm more in that style. Yeah, for sure.
Which, if you would look at the impact a player profile would have on the fold equity of your bluff, it's going to be higher than the ace of spades, queen of clubs, right?
Yeah, but if that guy is really good, he can do both. Like, some people can do both of those.
True. And also, you understand when blockers are important, when blockers aren't important. If the guy value bets 20 combos and you block 4 of them, that seems quite relevant. Whereas if the guy value bets 200 combos and you block 4 of them, it's not very relevant. Whereas people, or for a solver, it's equally relevant, right? Because, it's the EV difference is going to be very small, but always the kind of the tipping point between calling or folding. Whereas in practice, we should first underestimate what are the blocker impacts in this exact spot, and then see, okay, how high should blockers, unblockers be taken in consideration in my decision making.
Yeah, and I think always whenever I look at solver outputs, I'm not looking so much at what the solver considers correct or incorrect, more at what the solver considers close or not close. So if it's a 200 big blind pot and the solver thinks your call is winning 3 big blinds on the river, I think that just means it's close. I don't think 3 or -3 are any different in a 200 big blind pot. It's confusing because the solver will show you like always call this, always fold this, always bluff that, always give up that. And like you're saying, sometimes there is a huge difference considering blockers, but very often the differences are very, very minor and you should be focused on something else. So the kind of thought process I like to use when I get to a decision, I always think about the theory and I think, okay, I think my blockers are such where this is close or this is bad or this is good. And then I stop and I think, okay, what about all the other million things that are going on that would push me in one direction or another? And they're often worth so much more than the 2% that the blockers are worth. Yeah, there's even kind of a mathematical model for this that you could use sometimes where you're making a bluff catching decision and the solver thinks it's 3 BB per 100. And then you're like, okay, he needs to bet this range. I think, there is a 30% chance that he will never have bluffs because it's very unintuitive. If he were some over aggro maniac, I would know. So there's no chance of that. And then there's a 70% chance he probably bluffs enough, like a GTO player. And once you start breaking down things like that, where there is a chance my opponent is never bluffing here and there is a very low chance he's over bluffing, then the decision suddenly becomes crystal clear with no, you don't need to think about blockers anymore. You're just like, if 70% of the time I'm winning 3 big blinds and 30% of the time I'm losing 70 big blinds, the math is fairly simple.
Yeah, I usually talk about thinking in best versus worst case scenarios. Best case scenario, he does reach a GTO frequency, and indeed, you have a reasonably break-even call. Worst case scenario, he never has a bluff, and you're just punting away your stack, right?
Yeah, and as long as you're not playing guys like Linus or Stefan or like the aggroist maniac in your player pool, you can be fairly sure. Very few people manage to be as maniacal as a GTO solver would.
Yeah, like I think I already mentioned, even though we never spoke before the pod, I said I think we think very similar about poker, which up until now I can definitely confirm. I was actually already getting excited when you were talking about Magic and you were talking about preparing a deck and you look at, okay, what decks have been very popular. And then you can already think, people are probably going to show up with this deck. How can I counter that deck? And that was always how I approach poker as well, right? Like, okay, who are my players? What are their tendencies? First, we have to realize that everyone plays different, right? People already close off their mind because they think, oh, everyone nowadays plays the same. Well, then you're not looking good enough. Everyone has different tendencies because we're playing against humans. And I think the most interesting part in poker is trying to figure out what kind of tendencies this guy has and how I can shift my strategy to take most advantage of that.
And that there is so much depth to that. I think a lot of people, as they're moving up, they have this illusion that the game is solved and everyone's super good, and like that's really holding them back. There is so much room for gaining an advantage, and actually something I was thinking about the other day. And I assume again from what I'm hearing that you're the same. If I would sit at an NL 200 cash game table with 1 big whale and 4 regulars, I would not be playing as though I'm playing against 1 whale and 4 regulars. I would be thinking, okay, there is 1 big fish and 4 small fish at the table. So how do I'm going to exploit each and every one of you? The saying like at the table, if you can't spot the fish, then you're the fish. So if you treat the other regulars like they are just very good GTO machines, then you are the fish. You are the target. I think kind of if we're talking advice for people moving up, you don't be afraid. All the like online poker is super beatable. Everyone is super bad. I'm telling you, this is like at all stakes, even at high stakes. Everyone, I mean, not everyone, but for the most part, lots of people are making mistakes. It's a battle. We're playing poker. This isn't chess. This isn't science. We're only human. No one is mimicking stuff correctly, and like even at high stakes, a lot of people are simplifying their strategies in very obvious ways, and there are huge counters you can make to that, and they have no clue what to do about those. Like at every level, there's tons of room to treat people as fish and have fun rather than kind of being afraid and playing defense.
Yeah, but you first need to break that belief, right? There are things you can look for, because if you think everyone is GTO, then why would you even start looking, right? Because I also sometimes I see people that say, yeah, he's a wreck. I'm like, okay, yeah, what kind of wreck? Yeah, this is my tag for wreck. This is my tag for fish. And then they have two colors. I'm like, okay, you're missing a lot of nuances here. Oh, we're talking about the spewy rag, and nitty rag. It's like, come on, we need more information here to make good decisions. And especially, like you mentioned, right, on the river, 200 big blind pots. Well, if there you can avoid a minus 70 BB call, I think that has quite a big impact on your win rate compared to finding the optimal flop sizing.
I flop size. Don't get me started on people who look for the optimal flop sizing, but that's yeah, one of the biggest black holes for useless poker time that people spend. But yeah, I would say maybe a good heuristic for people is, if you are not yet playing nosebleeds online, there is no reg tag. It's either a reg fish, an aggro reg fish, or a nitty reg fish, but there is no reg. There are no regs.
I like that. I like that because it automatically makes you search, right? Because you don't give him the credit.
Nobody deserves credit in poker. I mean, as a mentality, of course, some people are going to be better than you are. And I'm like we're all fish. I'm also like a stationary reg fish myself, as self-admitted one. But yeah, I think the mentality you need in order to succeed in poker is to think that you can gain an edge against your opponents. And if you feel like you can't gain an edge and all you can do is break even, then that's all you're going to do. You're just going to break even. Like you'll win off the fish, you'll lose it to the rake, and that's where it's going to end.
Very good stuff. Very good stuff. Adam, what is your experience with exploitive players and their messed up mental game, or at least their bigger struggles? Let's keep it that way.
Yeah, it was very interesting to hear both of you talk about the difference between being a kind of GTO player and an intuition exploit player. Both of you guys fit into the exploit intuitive guys, and yeah, just acknowledging that comes with a higher amount of toll on the mental bandwidth. You're gonna have a lot more self-doubt in your game. Like Uri was saying, he's got this big divide between his games. He's like the best player in the world, plus 15 BB win rate, or he has that drop off to -1. I think when you are that type of player, you do need to spend a lot of time on looking for ways to protect yourself. Like Yuri was saying, like just acknowledging I'm going to have times when I shouldn't be playing. I shouldn't be trying to force myself to get creative here. I'm actually, I shouldn't be playing the game. So I think building clear profiles and understanding when your amazing exploits are now hitting you, and you need to almost protect yourself by taking breaks or getting out of the games altogether during those times. So yeah, I think the intuitive players have the harder job, and they need to do more work on the mental game and pay more attention to their ebbs and flows and their moods going into sessions. Whereas the logical GTO players, like you guys were saying, have more of a safety net. They can just follow a framework, and they're less involved emotionally because they've always got GTO did it, not me. So there's less of you involved in it. And also there's also a system that you're following where you don't need to solve every situation on the fly. You can just rely on a kind of default. So yeah, from my experience, I think a lot of players who I work with, big downswings, who lose confidence in their game, are generally the more intuitive players, and they almost lose confidence in the skill that has given them their edge. And as a result, they've got to like rebuild that confidence and go, oh, like Yuri talked about his friend who's amazing. when I'm on the most extreme downswings. And that's because obviously variance involved in that strategy, but also when you lose your confidence in those kind of players, there's almost like nothing to hold on to. Whereas GTO always creates a kind of safety net and an anchor to return to. So yeah, I think intuitive players have the harder job, in all honesty, especially from a mindset perspective. And yeah, it's just being very aware of it. And like Uri was talking about, trying to build a profile of when you're into that minus range of your game tree. And yeah, just finding ways to spot it earlier, and finding counters to that is going to be higher EV than anything else. So yeah, that'll be my kind of experience with that.
I wanted to add something to that, because I do think if I see a change in my game, implementing or understanding more theory compared to how I played before, which was just pure exploits. But after solvers came out and started to understand more theory, that did help me create sort of a fundament that my game can drop until a certain point, but there it stops. It no longer goes to like -10, but due to just, being able to play sort of in line when I don't feel at my best. My basically my bottom is not as bad anymore ever since I got better in theory.
Yeah. Unless you play against a really big fish, because then you don't rely on the theory safety net, so it can still be
No,
a big problem.
but that's the good thing. From that strong base now, I am able to constantly exploit, right? So I feel like right now I'm in a spot where I keep the benefits. Obviously, the benefits I think will be a bit reduced, because your mind will sometimes make GTO traps are like, oh, why the fuck did I think about this? This is way too theory oriented. So the top is a bit less on the top, I would say, but I think it's worth it compared to how deep the bottoms were, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be a foundation these days, because a lot of people are implementing strategies that are very unintuitive, and if you don't understand what they're doing, you cannot really counter it. Like all the solver strategies and the solver combos and the stuff that's going on, you can't hand read unless you understand how bet sizes work and how ranges work, and like suddenly someone check raises you and he shows middle pair years ago, that would never have happened unless he was a recreational. And if you're trying to exploit, and it's important, like the more you understand the better. Like you were saying, you don't need to know the exact frequencies. That is not very useful. But definitely I know you guys, I love the name of your course, The Mechanics of Poker. I think if you understand the mechanics of poker, brilliant name, really brilliant name, then you can use that both as a foundation, where you are deviating from something good, like you have the solid baseline, you don't have to guess at everything. When I was moving up in stakes, I was pure exploiting every single situation, like pure 200% exploitative game plan, 35% check raise flop, all sorts of like crazy things. This was in 2012 or so. And I had all these crazy leveling wars, and I was crushing everyone moving up, and then I moved up to a stake where like people were actually adjusting to me in good ways. They were calling me down in spots where I was always bluffing. They were defending their ranges better, and I was super lost. I had no clue what to do, because other than looking at your HUD and your fold to 3-bet, I don't know what the 3-betting range looks like. Like if your fold to 3-bet looks okay, what am I supposed to do now? I don't know. So to have the background and understanding how things work, I think is mandatory at some level. Like you could probably beat NL 200 with almost no background, if I had to guess, on a lot of sites. But at some point, it's mandatory to get this for your own mental health.
Yeah, it seems like for you, you do well once you understand a strategy, and then you can exploit from that. It reminds me of the story you told about playing Connect 4 with your mum. And as soon as you knew the strategy, you're like, all right, I know now. Now I'm in exploit zone. Good luck. So like having that base of strategy to refer to seems to work really well for you to be able to exploit around that. Like you said, you need a foundation to know when someone re-exploits you back, what's the next move? If you don't know that, you end up lost at some point. So yeah, having that kind of base is always going to be useful, especially for the way your mind works.
Yeah, so the course I just put out with Upswing, exploitative cash game exploits, there is a section about c-betting, and you guys probably know this, where there's this equilibrium where if someone c-bets too much, you start check raising him all the time. But most people do not check raise enough, so the exploit is to c-bet too much. Like this is, I think, something most exploitative players are aware of these days. It's one of the first things that jumps out when you look at c-betting strategies. And one of the important things that I talk about there is like this is step one of what's going on. Like there's c-betting too much, the guy check raises. How do you counter the guy who check raises too much? How do you or if you c-bet too much, which ways can people counter you? Which of these can you see and which will you not? Like, will you be able to see if someone check raises you too much? That's a tough thing to see. How do you know if someone's countering you? Like that, there's a lot of depth to thinking about these things. You can use solvers to figure them out. If you use solvers creatively, you're node locking, you're changing things up and not just like, okay, this is the GTO, let's randomize 80% c-bet. Because, you know, if someone c-bets 1/3 pot on a lot of boards, he's not randomizing 80%, he's doing 100%. So we're automatically in a leveling war on the flop. Most people, I think, don't realize that this is even going on. But yeah, there are lots of strategic levels to this. To all of the exploits have various levels to think about.
Would you say the person who knows the most steps or the most levels ahead in that exploit war generally has the biggest edge?
I mean, like I was saying before, it's part of the edge is knowing more, and part of the edge is being able to think very quickly and accurately when you're in the situation. The best player is going to be the one who thinks the best and deepest and also knows the most and also has the most stable mindset. Like if you asked me what would be the biggest boost to my win rate at this point, it has to be mindset, like no question. If I could eliminate the times where I shouldn't be playing, I can't imagine anything else that would help my win rate more than that. Being in the zone more, being, you know, punting less, doing stuff where a second later I know it's terrible. So that there are lots of aspects. This is definitely one of them. It's just one of many aspects. I think like poker is a very, very multi-dimensional game. Being successful in poker, you can't be good at just one thing.
Yeah. So what are you doing currently to work on your biggest mindset leak of spotting when you're punting, almost like protecting yourself by not playing in those states? So what are you doing currently to kind of eradicate those bad playing hours?
This is not. I'm not proud of how I handle these things, but I think one thing I do is I do shorter sessions with breaks in between. So that the session length is a limiting factor. Like I can't punt off for 4 hours because there's a mandatory break in between. And other things I'm doing is I'm trying to recognize patterns. Like I know, for example, that if I don't feel like doing chores, then I shouldn't be playing poker. Like that is the mindset of I just want to gamble and have fun or let some steam off, and that's not a good mindset for poker. So there are like tests I can make. Like I sit down at the computer, I know I need to call the bank. If I don't feel like calling the bank, I will not play poker. But yeah, there's tons of stuff going on there. I've done a decent amount of work with Jared Tendler, who's helped me a lot. Really smart guy. And yeah, it's an ongoing process for me. Like still not my best skill for sure.
Yeah, I like that one. If you don't want to ring the bank, it's a good sign that you're in a state of mind that isn't going to be conducive to your best poker performance. And we're all going to have unique kind of tendencies. So yeah, I think building that self-awareness of your patterns is kind of the first step. Then from there, you've got the option to either protect yourself by not playing and shorten your sessions like you were doing. Then the long-term solution is finding a resolution to those issues. How do I change my state of mind when I'm in this suboptimal state? How can I prime myself to be in a more advanced state of mind going into game? But yeah, I think self-awareness and spotting those patterns going forward is it takes time. Like you said, it's not a one fixed thing. It takes a lifetime to spot your own tendencies and your own patterns and the way you show up and the things that impact you. And yeah, the game tree of your mental, the game takes a while to figure out. So it's a work in progress. So I'd love to bring it back to your story and back to almost like starting out in poker, to be honest. I know we had you basically being a world champion in Magic the Gathering. And yeah, I'm really intrigued to know how the transition to poker went. I think it's, from my perspective, someone who's been a world champion at 23 before going into another game. I'm guessing there's some form of expectations going into poker, or at least some form of ego thinking, you know what, I'm good at strategy games. So talk us through when you first got into poker. How were you approaching it in terms of a strategy game? And did you have a high expectation or high ego going into that?
So I'll give you guys some background. I think I started poker at an older age than most people. And like I said, I was playing lots of strategy games, not just Magic and poker, and that's it. And I remember thinking at various points in my life when I'd do something like to completely crush a strategy game, and the game was, me and my friends would often stop playing after, because there was like we'd know the best strategy and there was no point. I often thought, I was so happy and so proud to do that, but it's such a shame that nobody really cares except me and my buddy who I play the game with. And I never imagined I was going to be a competitive gamer. I finished my BA in university. I went to work in a startup in computer science. And what happened to me there was that the guy sitting at the desk next to me was super passionate about programming. And he was a friend of mine, and he kept telling me, Uri, let's work on a computer game. Let's do this project. Let's do that project. And I would, like, when I would get home, I just want to play games. I didn't even think 1 second about programming. And kind of my family background, my mother is in career counseling. And I was always very, very much thinking that, your profession is where you spend maybe 1/3 to half of your hours as a grown-up. And it is just as important as finding the right person to spend the rest of your life with. It's a super important thing. So seeing him made me decide, I'm good at programming. It's fine. Like I enjoy it somewhat, but there is no passion there. So what happened was I quit programming, and I decided to study psychology. And at the same time, I started to play poker with my friends. And I remember this moment where I went over to a friend's house. We played like a $5 or $10 MTT together. And we won first place, $2,500. And it was such a powerful experience for me, where the entire next day, I just walked around the streets kind of daydreaming, like, is it actually possible to make a living doing this kind of thing? I was completely shocked. I never imagined this could be something I could do. Because like you guys have to understand, I don't know how old both of you guys are, but competitive gaming being something you can make a living at did not exist when I was growing up. We started having internet at home when I was 16 years old. Like, this is not something I grew up thinking was an option. And as I was playing poker and starting out and all these stories moving up, my biggest ambition in poker was like, I'm enjoying myself so much. If I can make as much money as I could, if I was like, if I can make $100 a day, I'm good. That's where I want to be in poker. And yeah, like looking at where I am now, I would never have imagined. I'm super grateful to the game, and I think a lot of I was always moving up stakes slowly. I hate risk. I hate gambling. Like, this is not something that appeals to me instinctively. I think for me, losing money hurts a lot more than winning money. I already kind of had my competitive appetite satisfied in Magic the Gathering. So I was just kind of thinking as a grown-up, like, where is my life going to be? And like, I finished my degree in psychology at the same time I was living with friends, all playing poker together. And at that point, the choice was very obvious, where Psychology is like 4 more years of study and then 4 years working at minimum wage, and I get to see if I enjoy the work or not. And I was grinding sit and goes as I was studying for tests. I loved poker all the time, was making decent money, so it was a very no-brainer decision to take that direction. And yeah, I did not have expectations. I didn't think I was gonna ever play 5-10. I was like, if I make it at 2-4, I'm happy. That's where I was aiming for when I was playing. And even when I remember one of the first times I played 25-50, I stacked off with someone in a 4-bet pot. I had kings, he had trips. With some hand he should have folded pre-flop. Like $12,000 pot. And you guys know how online it's like $12,000, but the software doesn't care. It's like, okay, turn card, river card, next hand, right? Everything's super fast, even though it's dramatic for you. And I hit the king on the river, scoop the $12,000 pot. And I was so shocked by that. I quit the table. I didn't touch 5K for a year. I was like, this is too much swings for me. I can't take it. So that's kind of, my expectations were, I did not expect to do well, and not this well in poker.
Yeah, it's so interesting for your generation because you're obviously an elite gamer. So now anyone who's 13 to 16 who plays games competitively knows they can make a living in many games. Whereas for you, that path wasn't in your horizon. It wasn't possible yet at that time. So you get into poker with a great skill set of being a gamer. You didn't realize you could monetize that. So when did that start to change? So when you went into poker, obviously you've graduated from university, you're living with friends who are playing poker. When did your eyes start to light up and start to think, wait a second, actually, this could be a really clear path? Because you said you're making money on the side. When did you really start to see the potential of your poker career?
So basically, like I said, I quit programming. We had the big $2,500 score split between two people. I know that sounds funny by today's standards for a lot of people, but all depends how much money you have in the bank, I think, and you have to realize like the Magic World Championship first place is $40,000, not $10 million like poker. So it's a very different world in terms of how much money you can make. I think like even the best Magic players in the world would always move on to some serious profession at some point. So the game was not nearly as competitive as poker is. And yeah, sorry, I'm losing track of the question. I'm sidetracking myself too much. You were saying when did
you start to realize how much potential poker had as a long-term career path, and when were you because you were in this mode of saying $100 a day would be a great amount for me. When did you start thinking, set your sights higher and having more success in poker?
So yeah, I think my first year in poker, me and 3 friends we all know each other for years from Magic the Gathering. We moved in together into a flat in Jerusalem, and one of the guys there was already fairly successful in poker. He was a pot limit Omaha player, and we all like he coached us a decent bit. We were all fairly clueless. And yeah, I think I fairly quickly saw that I was able to make money. I must have made, I don't know, maybe $50,000 in that first year, which, in terms of how much money that is, $50,000 at that time is similar to what I would have made as a full-time programmer working that year. And I was doing this as I was studying for psychology. Then second year, I was I started coaching a little bit for I coached someone for $50 an hour, and $50 an hour is a lot of money in the real world when you're a college student. That's an insane amount of money, $50 an hour. I know this varies country to country, but like all these things, they were all super huge for me. So yeah, I think within a year or two, it was clear that I was able to make a reasonable living playing poker, that it was definitely an option. And like I said, when you're thinking like $3,000 a month is like 1,000 to pay the rent, and then I have 2,000 for everything else, or I think rent is even less than 1,000 back then. Not aiming too high, not spending too much money. Yeah, I think it was fairly fast. Fairly fast. I think within, like I said, within 2 years, I finished my studies, and I was like, okay, I'm just doing poker full time.
So you described yourself as someone who's quite risk averse and you hate losing more than you like winning. Was there any obstacles you ran into with that kind of mindset going into poker, or in your first few years, did you run into any big downswings or any financial or losing periods where maybe it was hard to deal with?
Well, Black Friday was hard to deal with. If I don't know if you guys were playing back then, but Black Friday kind of annihilated most of my bankroll at the time, and that took me a few months mentally to recover from and start playing well again. I have never really had big downswings as I was playing. I think because of like what happened. It's tough to say if it's hurt me or not. I moved up stakes really slowly. Like you can imagine, I'm winning 10 BB per 100 at 50 NL. I'm probably by far the best player there, and I'm not interested in moving up. Like I'm scared to move up to take risks. And I remember first time I played NL 600, I lost 4 buy-ins in one session, and then I moved down for 1 month to NL 100 to grind the 4 buy-ins back. Like that is the mentality I had. So everything was just super slow. Personally, in my experience, the downswings were tough. I don't think being honest, I never had a big one. I don't know if I had even a 30 buy-in downswing in my entire career. But like that, a 20 buy-in downswing for me might feel like a 60 buy-in downswing for someone else, given my mental state. So I was just trying to protect myself from that. And like I said, when you're not aiming too high, you don't have to push yourself too hard. So that probably helped as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you had some protection mechanisms in play. One, having a high win rate at your game, being one of the best players, moving up very slowly. So you're probably way ready to move up stakes earlier, but to mitigate a lot of the risk. And that's obviously allowed you to go through your poker career, especially early career, without many of the swings that many players will be experiencing. So yeah, almost like that fear of risk or that risk aversion led you to create a safety first path where you were going to cap a lot of the downsides, obviously capping some of the upside as well, but it allowed you to kind of move quite smoothly through your poker career. So in terms of some skills you developed through gaming, what are some of the skills you feel like have been helpful for you as a poker player? We know we've got this kind of strategy thinker who's able to almost like think of their opponent's ranges. What are some of the other skills that being a gamer has helped you develop, which transitioned well into poker?
So I think the biggest one for Magic the Gathering and in a way from chess is that these are games, like I said, which I'm not sure I said this, but the randomness element is different than in poker. The games actually play a lot slower. Like one game can be 20, 30 minutes rather than one hand, which, can be 30, 60 seconds. You're not multi-tabling. Everything is being done live. So everything's so much slower. And this caused me to look for all the tiniest edges in every single decision, because you have time to think about it. And the times that you make a tiny mistake and you end up losing, it can haunt you for a long time. There's no like 5 tables in the background that you're multi-tabling and everything's moving fast. Like I remember one time I was in New York playing in a tournament, and we had like a 50-minute game, and I made like in the first 4 minutes like a tiny mistake, and that was a difference, winning or losing the game, and that game knocked me out of the tournament in retrospect. So when you play poker, like when I play poker and there is 2 big blinds and a 5-way limped pot on the river, I'm taking it super seriously. Like there's very little autopiloting in my game in any decision. I think I'm a lot better at small pots than most people as a result of my gaming background. Like I'm not in it for the big pots. I'm playing every single hand, every single decision. I'm thinking through as much as I can. And I think, maybe the strategy building aspect from, having so much experience in so many different forms of games and formulating strategies, especially before there were solvers, kind of helps you to think and not be too scared of trying stuff out. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, so that ability to go deep, very, very deep in the sort of nuances of decisions from gaming, where you had more time and small decisions, it sounded like had a big compounding effect. So that almost trained you to be very deliberate in every decision you make. So you have very little autopiloting, and it sounds like you go very, very deep with your decisions always. I'm guessing that has some negative effects. Would you say maybe that tires you out quicker? Would you say you're someone who needs more breaks in their sessions as a byproduct of that?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. If we think about mental fatigue, which definitely happens more to me these days when I'm older, I'm getting less sleep, and there's more stuff going on. If I could get to the flop, randomize 60% c bet with some hand, and just move on, that would be easier than getting to the flop. And there's a lot more going on for me before each decision. So there is, but I think in a way this is part of like why I'm passionate about poker, why I still enjoy poker. It's never been a grind for me in my life. Like I love playing poker. If it's the kind of job where, if it's 9 in the evening, I'm super tired, I want to do something for fun, I would play poker. Like even after all these years, I think that keeping an open mind and not automating your decisions makes it less of a grind. And in my eyes, kind of from the career counseling background, I think that is, that's worth more than money. That if you're able to enjoy the game, you're not automating everything, you don't find it boring. Like if you find poker boring, I'm not sure that it's the right game for you. Like I would rather make less money, playing the guitar, than make more money and be it boring play. And that's one of the lucky things about poker. One of the amazing things you get, that there are a lot of fields where you can be very passionate about it and very talented, but you will not make much money. And people live with that. Like I know people who make art, and they need to have jobs on the side, and they have to be careful with their savings. And we as poker players are like, this is like an alternate universe compared to a lot of professions in terms of the earning potential that you have for being good at this game.
That's very true. Yeah, your passion and your career can be the same thing. And yeah, I think it's a really good advice, like for players as well. If they're not feeling that passion for poker, they're not excited about it, they find the game boring, you're probably in the wrong domain. You need to find something else that lights you up, because poker should be fun. It should be this really exciting game. And if you're trying to fake that, or I spoke with a lot of players who've kind of been hinting on the fact that they're not enjoying the game, and they think the solution is more discipline, more willpower, force themselves to play more hours. And in reality, it's like they're not connected with the game. They've lost that passion. Either rekindle that passion and remember why you're playing this game and what an amazing opportunity it is, or you've got a long life. Go find something else that does light you up, that is fun, that you've got, like you said, that kind of career choice. 1/3 of your life is often spent on our kind of work life. So make it fun, make it passionate, make it something that you enjoy. And if poker does tick that box, amazing. Now your passion and your work career can be the same thing, which is very unique. Obviously, I think maybe sports people have this, maybe very talented artists like musicians and stuff would have this, their creativity and their passion becomes their career. But there's not many people. It must be on a small spectrum of people who can link their passions and their careers. And most, like you said, will have to have supplement income when they have something that they do for fun. They have to make money elsewhere, which takes a lot of time and energy. So yeah, it's a definite privilege to be a poker player. So for yourself, you mentioned your psychology background. How did that impact your poker career? And for you, like what are some of the things that, the kind of things you transition from learn about psychology into being a poker player?
It's funny that actually, I think the thing that most impacted my career as a poker player in my psychology study were the statistics courses that we took in psychology, because we talk about psychological studies talk about sample sizes, and they talk about variance, and they talk about how to handle large amounts of numbers. And a lot of these things are very relevant to poker. The rest, like I said, I didn't practice as a psychologist in any way. The psychology BA in university is mostly research oriented, so I can't say that like learning about the various proteins in the human brain is very relevant to playing poker. Neither is learning about various mental disorders, even though it's relevant to life. And certainly I have known players and they have mental disorders, and I know which, thanks to my psychology background. But at the tables, in terms of playing, I like it. It would be nice to say psychology is relevant, but that's not what you end up studying in university. You study a lot more dry, academic, research oriented, at least where I come from.
Yeah, that's interesting that the statistics module, which is probably the most boring, worst module for most of the psychology course, and you found that very interesting. And it was the same for me, actually. I did sports science, and sports science, especially degree level, is a lot about research and where the latest kind of research is taking performance, and you learn a lot about data, again, sample sizes, how the studies have been shown to show this performance variable in this particular sport. And I find that really fascinating as well in terms of how to use data to find a kind of narrative, or to support a hypothesis, or to disprove a hypothesis through kind of studies and research. So I can relate to that one as well. So for yourself, from what I'm getting from you so far, we've got this risk-averse kind of personality. We've got this kind of linear progress where you're having big win rates at your games and then moving up when the time's right, not taking on too much risk, and almost wait until you're almost sure that you can crush that level. Was there any roadblocks you hit in your career, or were you quite smooth all the way? Was there any defining moment where you're like, that was a big jump for me, a big jump where I really made a step up in my either stakes I was playing or a big breakthrough in my career?
I would say in terms of roadblocks, I never felt like I was hitting a roadblock other than Black Friday. Black Friday for me was like led to 6 months of breaking even when I needed the money more and I was more frustrated. It was playing bad and not really know what to do about it. And in terms of things that helped me, one of the things that helped me a lot at the start of my career was it's funny because we were talking. I probably before the podcast we were talking about how like in the world of poker, kind of being nice and sharing freely with people often has big benefits. So I was in a Skype study group, and I was in a Skype study group, and we were just kind of talking freely about lots of things. And one of the guys referenced me a post from a forum where there was a really good player poker player who wanted to learn Magic the Gathering. And he posted like, I'm looking for a Magic the Gathering coach. I'm willing to trade poker coaching for Magic the Gathering coaching. And this guy was charging like €300 an hour. I'm a 50 NL player. So I messaged him, and you can imagine his reaction. He's like, wow, the Magic the Gathering World Championship, Magic the Gathering World Champion is going to coach me. He's super happy. I'm thinking like, this guy's going to coach me. So I learned that this guy his nickname online was Grindcore. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah, he's Dutch,
He's
right?
kind of an old school guy. Yeah, he's Dutch. He's Dutch.
Yeah, I'm Dutch as well.
So
I know who he is.
So I worked with him a decent amount at that point and through the years. And at that point, he was many levels ahead of me and definitely kind of opened my mind where, I had a naturally exploitative approach, but he was a lot better at it than I was, and definitely taught me a lot of things about that throughout the years. So I think that had a fairly big effect. and generally just networking, just this network of friends that I had at the start and had throughout my career was constantly a huge benefit for me, where all the time opportunities would come up because of someone who I'd been friends with a year before. I can't say like how much those kind of things have helped me throughout the years at various points, whether it's been someone recommending a site or connecting me with someone else or talking to someone about strategy. I think in poker, definitely the GTO approach off the table is just not to worry about sharing information and being nice to people, and just kind of be open, be friendly, be honest. And it's such a huge world. Like, you don't need to worry about I'm gonna sit at the same table with this guy, I can't tell him this huge secret. Like, the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages. So I think that's kind of been a silent boost throughout my career in a variety of stages. But overall, it was pretty smooth sailing for me. Kind of, other than Black Friday, I was kind of moving up at my own pace. Every stake I moved up, I tended to have a similar win rate to the stake before. Because, like I said, I was moving up way too slowly. So it's not like the guys at the next level were much better than me. At the point where I moved up there, I was probably better than the next stake by the time I was there. So everything kind of smooth, chill. At least that's my memory. I don't know if I'm blocking stuff out, because like I said, emotionally it was a roller coaster, but overall it was very linear progress, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like the way you've almost planned your career. I'm not sure if this was a conscious plan from day one, but you've taken on less risk, like you said, moving up very slowly relative to your skill level. With that approach, you're going to experience a lot less variance and kind of ups and downs compared to most players. It sounds like for your mindset, your personality type, that was a good approach. And even though it might look linear as we tell the story, I'm guessing for you there was ups and downs and huge moments of doubt, like in the short term, which might not be front of mind right now. But I think it's interesting to know your tolerance for risk. I think I'm fascinated by that topic, because I think the advice often gets given quite broadly, like how much risk to take on. But you've really got to know yourself very well. And some players, making them take on a lot of risk is a really bad idea. Like the knock-on effects and the potential bad scenarios are way too big. So having worked with a lot of stables in the past, I know often one of the mistakes I see stables make is they push players to take on a lot of risk, because they're like, don't worry, we'll cover the downside. It's no big deal. But the player himself, all of a sudden he's going hugely down, and he can't deal with it mentally. But from the stable's perspective, it's like, oh, just grind out a makeups, no big deal. But he's just took on 20K of makeup in the course of a series, and now he's really doubting everything about poker, his life, and his whole world models came apart because he wasn't ready to take on that risk. So I think sometimes just knowing, are you the person who responds well to risk? In my life, I've generally done well with risk, but I know my tolerance. I know when I'm taking on too much. And on the flip side, I've got lots of friends who are very risk averse, and they'll make similar decisions to you, where they'll just not put themselves in positions to experience any variance. So I think it's the self-awareness to know which is going to be a good fit for you. And I found it really interesting what you were saying about your network. And it sounds like for you, you've been a very giving person throughout your career, a nice guy who's been very authentic, and you've been willing to share knowledge and share your advice. And as a result of that, you've attracted the right type of people. I think that's another thing, like in the poker world. I think often players, we have two camps. One will share freely, others will be quite secretive. And I think I agree with you. And I think Rene is the same mindset of giving freely in a way to build connections, to help other people, will often pay back infinitely amounts compared to the short-term EV loss of maybe sharing a strategy. So I found it interesting. We've had quite a lot of guests on our show so far, and a few of them mentioned you as almost like a master strategist. They class you as someone who was able to think outside the box in ways that other players can't. Would you say that was a strength of yours, your ability to think outside the box? And why do you think other players would classify you as a good outside the box thinker?
I think thinking outside the box, like I said, throughout all the strategy games I've played, that's always been a big strength of mine. both computer games, Magic the Gathering, like I said, you have thousands of different cards that you're making strategies from, and very often, like, I would come up with a strategy no one had thought of, and then it would win the Australian Championship and the US Championship, and everyone was playing with the cards that I'd kind of put together in the first place. So I think, again, this is my biggest skill in poker, is putting together strategies. More than I am a strong player. I think I'm a reasonably strong player, but there are definitely people I know and people who I've coached who, as far as, like, if we're sitting at the table, their brain is, it has a higher CPU than mine. And I had the same in Magic the Gathering, where I was the best player in Israel for a while. And I had a friend come along, young guy, and it was super clear. I'll give you guys an example. So imagine there are 20 cards on a board, and you have to come up with a good game plan. So most guys, they would stare at the 20 cards that just get confused. Like, they would not be able to hold all the information in their brain, and that makes some huge punt, even very good players. And I was able to look at the 20 cards, think for like 30 seconds, try to calculate, and then make a reasonable play. And this guy would look at the cards for half a second and he'd make the best play. So this is like the caliber of processor in your brain. But he had no ability to come up with strategies. He like that. There are so I think for me, this has always been my big strength throughout my life, is to think about the big picture, know what information is important and what is less important. When we're working with poker, with solvers, like Rene was saying about bet sizing frequency, there's so much information when you work with these tools, that if you're just going, even with a very fast processor, if you just go over everything, it's never going to end. And I'm very good at kind of navigating through the, like, I don't care about this, I don't care about that, this is really interesting. If I get stuck, I'm very easily moving on. So I think this is like my talent in poker, more so than anything else.
This podcast is brought to you by Poker Ambition, where me and Adam have created our coaching program, The Mechanics of Poker. After having reached high stakes poker ourselves, we tested out this philosophy on our CFP students, which saw them rise through the ranks and double their win rate. We then took the best knowledge of that CFP program and turned it into the mechanics of poker, so you can have that high quality content without the long-term commitment and often hefty price that comes with a CFP program. Now I will be teaching you the technical side of how poker really works, how to think about the game, and how to consistently get better. And Adam focuses on the mindset and performance skills you need to know in order to convert all that technical poker knowledge into more consistent profits at the table. Now, this program is high level. It's made for professional poker players who have the ambition to break free from mid stakes and move up to high stakes poker. So if you're ambitious about your poker goals, go over to pokerambition.com for more information. And there you can also find a free 1-hour demo of everything that is inside the program. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But without further ado, let's get back to more goodness in this episode.
The ability to build strategies. So yeah, I think we talked about this concept with a Brazilian guest called Zinhao, and he was talking about having different almost avatars of poker players. We talked about a logical player who's going to get the GTO guy. We talked about the exploit guy who's very intuitive. And then we talked about an architect who likes to build stuff. And Zinhao himself is someone who likes to build strategies. And you sound like that kind of architect guy who likes to build out these really complex strategies. And yeah, you probably spend a lot of time away from poker. I'm guessing that's why you've went into creating courses right now, because your skill is to build these strategies, which, like you said, I was thinking as you were talking, if I look at 20 cards next to each other, I'm like, wow, like, where do you begin to start making links here? So yeah, it's definitely a unique skill set to be able to come up with strategies relative to that. So yeah, I can see that why that was a good skill of yours. So Rene, I'm sure you've got a bunch of questions on creating poker strategies. It's very much in your line of expertise.
Yeah, again, we're very, very similar in this matter, right? This was also actually one of the reasons I went into poker coaching, because what I always liked about poker was the coming up with strategy. I actually preferred studying and strategy way more than actually playing. So then I was like, how can I get paid doing what I like? So then we did a CFP. I was like, so these guys pay me to study the game, and then I'll explain them what to do. So it's a perfect exchange, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and I notice it as well in other games when we go play other games, and I compare it to other friends of mine. Uh, I understand immediately like how games work, basically a bit faster than others. I'm like, yeah, this is quite obvious, right? You should make this play, you should make this play, even in other games. So I think that's definitely
Mhm.
a skill that has helped me as well. I wanted to touch on a point that we made about brain fatigue, about if you, especially if you have no baseline. Let's say, for example, pre-flop. You decide pre-flop what to raise based on the opponents that are at the table, right? It's a decision that a lot of people already simplified because they just use a pre-flop chart, and they might start to think on the turn and on the river, right? Whereas it sounds like your style and more exploitative style, when you try to push all edges, already pre-flop you're thinking a lot. On a flop you're thinking a lot. So the kind of the dark side of that is that indeed you're kind of capped in how much hours you can make, right? You have probably you never been a guy who grinded 100,000 hands in a month. Me neither. Like I would say stuck at 40,000, because then my brain would have, smoke would come out of my brain because of the amount of thinking I do. Um, what I then suffered with when I started to realize, so I suffered then from volume, right? I always had a high win rate, but I couldn't play that much volume because of the style. And I also noticed, because I knew there was a very big range in my game, right? In the beginning, we talked about plus 15 or minus 10. These were two versions of myself that could show up. I started to suffer from some pre-session anxieties, like, which version of myself is going to show up? And I would almost become a little bit perfectionistic in everything around me, trying to show up at my best, because I knew that that was the version of myself that would be a plus V player, and the other version was not a plus V player. Did you ever suffer from similar anxieties around performing?
Yes, yes, for sure. I think one of the toughest things for me when I play poker is that I'm not sure that I'm a winning player, which is a hard thing to say because clearly overall I'm a winning player with a high win rate my entire career. But this day or this week or this month, I know there is a reasonable chance I'm a losing player, and that's a very hard reality to deal with. That you sit down at the table and you lose money, but it's not just that you lost because of variance. You also lost because and not just because of bad play, but you lost because today you are a bad player. You shouldn't have been playing. So I think that like that dealing with that has definitely been a struggle for me. I identify with you, like when you're saying 40,000 hands a month. I'm not sure I had many months where I even hit 40,000 hands. I think for me the area was mostly more like 30,000, 35,000 a month. You play less tables, you play less volume. It's more emotional. Like all these things are very. I can very much identify with everything you're saying.
What were then some of the things you tried to do in order to make sure that you show up at your best?
So I'll start out saying, like I said, I'm not proud of this. This has been a neglected area for me for a long time. In terms of things that I do these days, where I've put more work into it, these days is like the most crazy for me because I have two kids. One of them is still a baby, so I get 5 to 6 hours sleep at night interrupted. Then we get up, get the kid ready for kindergarten, drive him there in traffic jams and everything, and get back home. It's 9 in the morning, and most guys are still sleeping. They're gonna get up, go to the gym, whatever, start playing. I've already been up for 3 or 4 hours. I haven't slept enough, and I need to be in a good mindset for playing poker. So I'm still kind of figuring it out. Just I think being aware that this is part of the skill set that I need is a big help. Not thinking about, like, it's not just about knowing how to play poker. You have to know how to handle yourself and your life, how to balance these things together with poker, kind of treat it like an athlete would treat things. Like, you can't have 3 beers, eat a bunch of junk food, and then go to a basketball game. So when you play poker, if it's possible, which it isn't always, I try to have some sort of separation. So I will not play poker if I only have an hour and a half and then I have to run somewhere because my brain is too busy. I try to kind of finish as many other tasks that might be distracting me before sitting down at the table. And overall, yeah, let me think. Which other things I'm doing? The breaks. I try to take breaks where I am, taking long walks or taking a nap rather than going on Twitter or playing computer games or stuff like that I used to do, which is probably not the best idea. So kind of trying to lessen the load on my mind to get to poker from a place where the rest of my life is as in harmony as I can manage before I sit down to play. And also I'm constantly aware of, do I want to play? Because very often I won't be in, like, my life is a bit chaotic sometimes, but I really, really feel like playing. I always think that's kind of a good sign, like where the passion is there and you really want to play. You're not from like a downswing, I really want to win money, but just I really feel like playing. So I try to pick those kind of times and just to, yeah, I don't kind of treat my work as everything. Like, part of my work as a poker player is setting all my financial affairs in order, making sure the house is tidy, eating properly, sleeping properly, exercising. Like, all of these are part of playing good poker. I don't think you can really separate them.
Yeah, it's I definitely approached it in the same way, but I think at some point I sort of became almost neurotic. Like, oh, I ate a hamburger yesterday. I cannot play the next day. So I will just study instead. Everything to avoid trying to show up and not playing my A game. And that has personally cost me a lot of volume. And like I said, that would definitely increase the anxiety. And maybe also for some players who struggle with this. I did a lot of sessions with Jared Tendler as well. Shout out to Jared Tendler. And I remember he gave me the example. Yeah, you think of it too black and white. He said white in this case is you being a plus 15 BB winner, but black, he says, you don't even know what the other side actually is. You're afraid that it's minus 10 BB, but you never showed up when you only had 6 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep. So how do you know? And the same if I would come back from a holiday or something, from a break, I would spend like 4 days studying and preparing in a way that, okay, I'm going to perform at my best. But he actually gave me the advice, which I thought was very good. He said, when you come back from a break or from a holiday, just sit down and see what shows up. So you get more familiar with the bottom part of your range, like your C game, for example, and see that it's actually not as bad as you might think. Right. And that really helped me when I started to see, like, indeed, actually, it's more sort of the anticipation of how bad my C game is than how bad my C game actually is. And that has really helped me. So maybe that's a good tip for you as well, and for our audience listening.
Yeah, and another thing again that I think you can take away from working with Jared is that your C game is going to show up sometimes, and you can try thinking about, like, when it shows up, which kind of mistakes did I make, and the more aware you are of those, you can study the situations better. Because I'm sure even not like Limitless in his C game will raise 7 deuce offsuit under the gun. Shout out to Limitless if you guys saw that hand. But I'm sure you would not do that even in your D game. And there's a bunch of things that even us as very exploitative players, where we're not going that far. And the more you can improve and kind of recognize the types of mistakes that show up, you can even try to counter them with biases. Like you were saying, like, if I know I'm naturally stationy and it gets worse when I'm playing bad, uh, you can try to mitigate the damage. Like making the C game less bad is also a form of both reducing anxiety, getting familiar with it. It lets you increase your volume. Like that, there's a bunch of stuff that can be done there.
Yeah, I think he really helped me see the game as an opportunity. So you mentioned Grindcore, who had a big influence in your game. Do you remember any like aha moments from coaching sessions with him that you might like to share with the audience? Maybe they have an aha moment for themselves as well.
I like in poker, I remember I had 3 aha moments. Yeah, how do you say it? Aha moments. I had 3. One of them was with Grindcore, one was before Grindcore, and one was with PO Solver. So if we start with if we go kind of in chronological order, I think the first one I was, I'd started out playing NL 100 when I started with cash games, and I was in kind of the mode that I told you guys I think is a bad frame of mind to be in. I was thinking all the regulars are really good. I'll focus on a recreational and just try to avoid them. And at some point, a bit down the line, I bought into like a $100 buy-in tournament, which was very big for my bankroll at the time. And when I was playing there and I was playing against a regular, something clicked in my mind where I felt like I had enough experience to know how he would perceive what I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, I started bluffing the hell out of all the regulars in a bunch of very believable lines that nobody ever bluffed. My red line shot up, and that was kind of my first moment where I was like, if I triple barrel this spot, this guy's going to be sure I have something strong. So I just not look at my cards and just blast off for a long time. Just fun times.
Yeah, you became very good at storytelling, and I like to think of poker in a
Exactly.
way we're telling stories and we're trying to tell as convincing story to the other person so he believes us, and vice versa as well. We're always trying to
Mm-hmm.
think what story is my opponent telling, and does this story check out? Which is ways of thinking about the game that I think sort of post solver era guys kind of stopped doing because they're constantly thinking about what does my range have to do. I'm like, come on, think about what your opponent has, right? That's a question that is nowadays often forgotten. I think it's a shame. It's a shame actually.
Yeah, that there are some spots where you can tell such a believable story that your opponent will just fold his entire range. There used to be more than they are now, because if you play against a solver guy, he will RNG some number even if he can't imagine what you're bluffing with.
Yeah, it's so tilting. I almost feel like it's disrespectful to the great story that I told that he didn't make the hero fold.
Yes, for sure, for sure. I remember one time where I ran this huge bluff in a spot nobody's ever bluffing on a board. I think the board was like ace king, and some 3-bet pot or 4-bet pot, and I like shoved 200 big blinds over the guy's river bet, where obviously I have some kind of boat or quads or something, and he just snap called with a 6 high flush. I was super tilted because he's not paying attention to my story. I don't mind if you call, but if you snap call, that's very disrespectful to the story. It's like he's not even listening to me. So yeah, I think storytelling is a really nice way to frame that. So I kind of got aware of the storytelling aspect of the game. I think that was my first moment where I was like, once you start to follow the story, you can lie convincingly and you can spot other people's lies better, and you can start, especially at low and mid stakes, like that is often enough to just be a huge winner at those stakes. Now, in terms of grindcore, the moment I had with grindcore was actually a super powerful one. And you have to remember, this was years and years ago. And back then, everyone would always c-bet. Like that was how you started the hand, you c-bet. And he was sweating me in a coaching session. And I got some bored and I went to c-bet, and grindcore told me, you don't have to c-bet. And my brain exploded. I was like, wow, so many possibilities if I don't have to c-bet. And he was like, let's think what's going to happen if you check back. And the possibilities are endless once you're not in a box of that you have to do something. And I think he really opened my mind in a bunch of ways to note taking in general, but also just to the fact that I don't have to play spots like a robot. There's absolutely nothing that I have to do. And I don't have to 3-bet ace king. I don't have to c-bet with my overpair. I can do whatever I want as long as I have good reasons for it. So that was the moment with grindcore. And the moment with PO Solver, PO Solver was a program that I hesitated getting because I'm not naturally a computer program kind of guy. I might give off the wrong impression, but I'm not very tech savvy. So when I saw there's a program with all these complicated outputs, I did not really want to change my game. Everything was going well. I wasn't attracted to it. But when I finally decided to get it, PO Solver, when it came out, we didn't have pre-flop ranges, even like you didn't have GTO pre-flop ranges at the start. So you had to input everything. And then it came up with really weird strategies for someone who'd been playing for years before and doing well. PO Solver was doing some really strange things, some weird shit going on. And I looked at it and I was like, this makes no sense. This is a terrible way to play. So I node locked the way that I would play. I ran the node lock. I saw how PO Solver would crush me. And that was my third moment, I think, in my career, like understanding all the holes that had been in my strategy that nobody had ever seen, and kind of, rather than using this to think, oh, I have to play PO Solver strategy now so people can't exploit me, I was thinking, this is a really good exploit against half the people I'm playing against. So I'm going to do that.
That's a very big one. I'm usually a very big advocate as well as when you study solver. It's mainly important to study the aggressor spots, right? Because we want to, I think you mentioned this in the beginning as well, you want to kind of know what kind of ranges are playing, what things people are doing, and then think about how would a human being interpretate what the solver is doing and then execute it. And that's kind of what you're then describing, because then you will see the corrections, like, okay, how can I then counter if the initial raiser should do this because of that, while he's probably not doing that because a human interpretation of the solver is doing different, then what is the counter exploit to what humans are basically doing? And then you're basically found a way to exploit human implications of GTO.
Exactly. And very often it's actually easier to play against someone who's using a solver than someone who isn't, because you know how he's going to perceive spots, how he's thinking about them. And if you're studying in this way, I'm all the time thinking what types of mistakes people who follow the solver are going to make. Like you said, they will bluff the river at 50% frequency because they know that's the frequency. But what are they doing on the flop? What are they doing on the turn? And then, you can kind of understand, are they over bluffing? Are they under bluffing? What is likely going on in each situation?
Yeah, I think a good example of that is in the past when I would play against Linus and OTB. Linus was, trying to play closer to GTO. I remember very limited in sizings that he used, but very good in the frequencies for the sizings that he picked. But in a way, so he was very good, but you always kind of knew what to expect. Whereas when you would play against OTB, it's like OTB could throw out anything at any random given moment. So on one way, obviously they were both hard to play against, but on one way I thought the OTB was always like, okay, what the fuck is he gonna do now? You always had to be very sharp and on your toes, right? I thought that was harder sort of to play against than if someone at least stays in a predictable game tree.
One of the moments I was most proud of in my poker career Again, years and years ago, I was playing Zoom 500 and I stole OTB's big blind. And I was super pumped that I managed to steal his big blind. Yeah, he's a legendary player. I remember talking to high stakes guys, and a friend told me about OTB. He said he's impossible to play against. He has a million sizings in every spot, and they're all perfectly balanced, and you're just helpless. Like that was the feeling of terror that he inspired in people for sure. And the funny thing is, this is something I thought about earlier this week as well, is that, you know, if I were playing with someone as good as OTB, I would probably try to stay out of his way a bit, because, you know, you don't want the pain of him beating you up. And the way Six Max works is, if I stay out of his way, then his win rate goes up. That's good for him, even if he has an edge against me. You know, if I VPIP less when he's in the hand, that's good for his win rate. So I think by being so intimidating, like Linus and OTB, they are gaining kind of win rate bonuses just by people avoiding them. I think there's a decent chance that's going on. And really interesting to hear about Linus. I have not played with him very much, so I don't know how GTO he plays. I know I've seen several hands where he was certainly not playing GTO, at least pre-flop. So I was never sure either one of them, like how exactly they were playing, other than that they were obviously very good and that it was clear that they understood GTO much better than everyone else around them. I think that's always been clear when you study hand histories, that OTB, you know, he had a solver before PO solver was out. I think that's fairly clear. Linus has studied with a solver very, very well, and he knows GTO a lot better than everyone around him at high stakes. I think that's also fairly clear. But yeah, I'd be interested in hearing any stories you have about either of them. I love hearing Linus and OTB stories.
I think I've told this story before, but the nicest story I always have about Linus when he was trying to move up is when we would play a 3 or 4 handed game at, let's say, 1K or 2K, and then when the table would fill with a fish, he would snap leave and start a new 3 handed game. That's always my best story about Linus. He was like, "Fuck fish, leave," and then battle Rex again. That's by far my best story about Linus. And like I said, with OTB, it's just, yeah, it's sort of the fear of that you never knew what to anticipate. What I remember from Linus as well is that he was very good at throwing his stack in. He would wasn't that creative with the sizing that he picked, but he definitely knew when to shove his stack in. Somehow, always when I played a hand against Linus, it would end up with him jamming his stack in the middle of the river and me being like, "Fuck my life." I remember that was also a takeaway. I did then also took up on your advice. I would try to avoid playing against Linus or OTB. That was in general, guys. This is in general. This is just good advice. Also, in terms of, I listened a little bit to your conversation with Doc Polk, and we were talking about RTA and stuff. And I also always say this, like, listen, if you have a guy who's crushing and who's playing very good, he's either very good or he's cheating. And both ways, I don't want to play with that guy, so I will try to avoid him. And also in terms of the avoiding, I think this is also very good advice, and something that can sometimes tilt me if you look at, for example, people following preflop ranges. Let's say you're in the big blind and you have your preflop defend chart. Okay, well, the range that you are allowed to play is based on, the opening sizing, the odds, etc. But a very important factor is your equity realization, right? How much does your opponent allow you? How much of your equity does your opponent's strategy allow you to realize? And also, I have something that I call my bluff ability. So how effective can I bluff against this guy? So if I would then play against OTB, who was very aggressive, same as Linus, they were very aggressive and they didn't like to fold. Then if I have my fucking 6-5 offsuit in the big blind and it's quite close, then you have to understand that versus OTB and Linus, it's probably going to lose you money, right? And I think these are ways that people who follow just solvers, they don't take in consideration the skill of execution, I would say, right? That we're human. I'm not gonna be able to play that hand profitably versus a player like OTB and Linus.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, if you are worse than the guy you're playing against, or even if you're not worse and he's just like a good aggressive player, right? Like, if someone is a good aggressive player, even if you are at his level, this is going to make parts of your range underperform and other parts overperform. And it's good to account for that and be aware of that as much as you can. And pre-flop ranges and GTO strategies are definitely not the Bible in poker. They're a reference point for a toy game. Like, GTO is not reality. A bluff is mixed on the turn if you execute it correctly on the river. If you're going to chicken out on the river, you shouldn't mix the turn, because some of the river spots are plus EV. You're missing those, it's game over. Like, you have to think things all the way through. And yeah, I think, like you were saying in the beginning, people who focus a lot on flop sizes and flop frequencies are completely missing the fact that they're going to butcher the turn in the river, so the flop frequency is completely meaningless. Taking that into consideration. Like, if I wanted to teach someone how to play, you start with learning how to play the river. You then go to learn how to play the turn, and flop is like the least important street. It's very difficult to make a flop mistake, like an EV mistake on the flop. Almost anything you do is okay with almost any hand on the flop. On the river, it's super easy to make a mistake. On the turn, it's fairly easy to make a mistake. Flop is like the least important street to study. And I feel like, for people who are very organized and very linear, like you're used to studying in school, you go first grade, second grade, third grade. So you might think poker goes flop, turn, river, pre-flop, flop, turn, river. But I think it's actually the opposite in terms of the effect on your win rate.
So this is a very interesting point, because I used to think very much from pre-flop to the river. But nowadays I also see a lot of benefits from, okay, what would I indeed teach? I would start with filtering out the river blunders first. So the huge spews and the hero calls in spots where they just shouldn't hero call. But a big part of my coaching philosophy as well is often people don't think ahead enough in a hand. Often, for example, if you get into a hand with 5-6 offsuit versus OTB big blind button, I say, yeah, okay, we can talk about the rest of the hand, but you shouldn't have been in the hand. Any mistake, any tough spot that will now follow is a result of you getting in the hand pre-flop where you shouldn't have been. So that's very important. And from an EV perspective, if you look at the solver, on the flop, anything that you decide to put into a solver or any deviations that you make will not make any difference. But that's because the solver, regardless of the sizing that you choose, is going to execute turn and river perfectly. And if you make a mistake, he will sort of make up for that mistake on the turn and the river. And that's why on the river, in a solver, there's no more future play, right? We don't have an ocean we don't have a sixth card. So he can no longer make up for the mistake that you make on the earliest street. I personally always say that forget about EVs, okay, on the flop. You don't have to look at it because they don't matter, right? It's the same as sometimes I see, I have to float this hand 50% of the time. Then they float it, and then they forget to bluff it. I'm like, oh yeah, if you're not going to bluff it on the later street, you shouldn't have floated it on the flop. But to come full circle now into a question for you, what do you think then? Do you understand what I mean when I say that flop, I think, is very important because certain hands lead to tough spots and mistake. Let's say, for example, you have a hand that clearly wants to bet big in order to avoid future street play. Okay, I think this is a common example. But he starts with a small sizing, which in a solver is, doesn't really make much of a difference because the solver is going to use turn and river to play it perfectly. But then often they get into S-play scenarios on turn and river because they didn't think ahead with their hand on the flop. So from that perspective, I would say flop is most important because that's where you decide where the hand is going to go, right? Same on the turn. Let's say, for example, you have a very poor bluff catcher on the river, given your blocker properties or given the type of your opponent you're playing against. Then you should think ahead to the river, realize that you have a very poor bluff catcher given your blockers or your opponent's player profile. So you should not move that hand into a bluff catch line. And therefore, you should try to bet that hand so you avoid getting in a minus EV bluff catch spot on the river. So that, in my opinion, is very important. That's an argument why I think flop is super important. But then again, if people spew the river in spots where they just shouldn't hero call, but they call it 50% of the time because that's what the solver says, I think that's also a very big mistake. But which one you think is most important?
It's fascinating because there are so many facets to the game, because everything you're saying is super correct. I agree with you. And the game is just so multidimensional. It's tough to say which is that there. Oh wait, why does it say on my screen? Yep, I'm still here. Okay, it was going to quit the talk, but yeah, I think there are a lot of things that are important, and what I like about what we're both saying is we're talking about things that they have an influence on your win rate, right? Like whether you see bet 1/3 on this texture or half on that texture is not really going to have a big effect on your win rate. But there are hands where you should be doing something else, like you mentioned, and recognizing that will give you an immediate win rate boost. River can give you immediate win rate boosts, and definitely planning the hand ahead. And this is also something one of my first coaches told me. I think I had like 2 coaching sessions with a guy who was charging $100 an hour in my first year in poker. And one of the first things he told me was, he said, before you make a flop bet, think about what you're going to do on a turn. Think about what you're going to do, like which turns are you going to take what actions, which rivers are you going to take what actions. And that's often going to affect your flop decision. If you think ahead, maybe you decide, this shouldn't be a bet. So I think this is what you're mentioning.
Yeah,
it's an advanced skill. It's super important. I'm not sure everyone is capable of thinking about it this way. I think some guys need clear guidelines, but definitely, I can't judge which. Like, you have to do both. If you want to be very good at poker, you have to. Sometimes people come and tell me, I'm on a downswing. I think it's because of this reason or that reason. Let's work on that. And I always tell them, we're just working on everything. There's any improvement we can make in any spot in your game is good. I don't care about your red line. I don't care that you overfold rivers or underfold rivers. We just want to make you, better across the board, and anything we can find. Like you were saying, sometimes someone will ask you about the river and you'll tell them like you should have folded pre-flop. I think that's really good advice and a really good way of looking at every hand as something holistic, where it's not about the river decision or the turn decision. It's about the underlying thought process that you have and that you use to play poker, and we want to improve that so that you win more money, right? That's what most guys want when they play poker, at least.
Yeah, that's in the end the goal, right? And with that, you need a better understanding of why, for example, a preflop range big blind versus button looks the way it looks. So if you understand the why and the mechanics, right, of how the range looks and how it works, then from there you can estimate the situation yourself and come up with your own preflop range, right? And this works for post flop as well. Oh, why does a solver how does it generate EV by taking this sizing? Can I generate EV in the same way in practice, or even in a higher way by choosing a different sizing, right? These are ways I think it's important to think about the game. I thought it was interesting that you said that when I started on my ramble about how we should look ahead and how, often we get in S-played scenarios where I was like, yeah, this is indeed a tough spot. You should have prevented getting in the tough spot. I think actually this is a very important skill in poker. Like I mentioned this in the mechanics as well. I say it's not that I don't think the decision you're in now is a tough decision. And it's not like I would make a better decision. I design my strategy in a way that I don't get in that spot as frequently as you do. And once you start to realize that, it's like, yeah, you get into S-played scenarios constantly where you're in a tough spot because of the way you plan your hand. I plan it differently, so I avoid getting in these tough spots, right? But you mentioned that is a skill. And also you mentioned the question that you believe that you need talent in order to succeed. Is that then one of these talents that a player can have that other players don't, that makes them excel? And what do you think are some talents that you need to possess to become a successful poker player?
So I think it depends on your definition of being successful. Like I was saying, if you're satisfied at beating 2-4, the talents you need are different than if you want to make it all the way up to nosebleeds. But what you're describing, if I talk to someone and he's talking about hands, and he starts saying on the flop something like, this is a hand that I want to bet big, because then I fold this and this hand that would later dominate my hand when I make top pair. And but this player type is this and that, so I'm going to do so. If someone starts talking like that, I instantly think, this guy's making it to high stakes, right? Like someone who's able to form, even if everything he's saying is wrong, like that doesn't matter if he's right or wrong. It's more the depth that he's able to analyze, because I can teach him to do it correctly. But if he's able to think deeply and quickly about these spots, I think that's to make it to high stakes. I think to like low or mid stakes is a lot more about discipline. And if you kind of play solid and you don't do nonsense plays, that is often, I mean, not that playing solid is simple, but you don't need to be able to do all these things. You can execute much simpler things and beat low to mid stakes. So really depends, I think, what the guy is looking for. And I had something else I wanted to say. I forgot what it was. So did you ask something else? I'm going
I mean, to be
tangents. I'm
honest,
not
I
sure.
went on a little bit of a ramble, so I don't blame you. I honestly also don't remember exactly. I will just add something and maybe it will pop into your mind. I usually advice that I will give as well, or what I sometimes see is when a player is playing 15L, 100L, 200L, they're trying to make 5K plays while their goal should be to make plays that will get them to the next level first, right? And that's kind of, you mentioned already, just play solid. But I think we need to define a little bit, Uri, what is solid? We had the same conversation with Jared, man. He said, just play solid, right? And that was very good advice. But what can you try to define what solid means?
That's a really good question, because if it were easy to play solid, everyone would play solid, and obviously a lot of people struggle at 50 NL. And I think the thing you described with 5K NL is an example of a leak a lot of guys have, where they get to the river and they're trying to think, what is my range? Which combos should I call? Which combos should I fold? Where the thought process they should be using is a lot more simple in terms of, I guess this ties into what I wanted to say before. So you were talking about having a really tough decision on the river. And I think one of the things that you need to accept in poker is that each of the hands in your range is interested in the pot being a specific size. And you're not the only one who has a say in this. And if your opponent makes the pot bigger, you're gonna have a tough decision, and that's unavoidable. And in theory, your EV is 0. That's why it feels bad. You can try to eke out a few big blinds with reads or whatever, but sometimes hands get into shitty spots. And I think kind of it's tough for people to accept this when they're at low stakes, for sure. They're like, I don't want my aces to be a 0 EV bluff catcher. There has to be a better answer than that. But sometimes the guy goes check raise flop, bet turn, shove river, your aces is a 0 EV bluff catcher. Like what can you do about it? There's no way to avoid that situation. So that was kind of the thing I wanted to say about that. And the second thing, like the advice, like I said, for low stakes players, there are a few different types of advice. I think playing solid is mostly, like I said, treating people as fish. All the guys around you as fish. You're a fish. Don't think people are super creative. There's kind of like basic low stakes. Don't make hero calls. Don't make hero folds. Don't be tricky and slow play and randomize. Just bet your own hands for value. try to categorize the players that you're playing against. Is he a nit fish or an aggro fish or an aggro reg fish? Always try to think big picture. I think if you manage to do all of those reasonably well, and you have a basic strategy of like understanding the size of the pot that your hand wants. So don't start being, well, PO solver will triple barrel my middle pair and overbet river because like you're not going to get those right. Middle pair wants one bet to go in, so try to play a line where one bet goes in, and you'll be okay. If you start getting creative, check raise, overbet, shoving the river, and all these things, when you're at low stakes, you don't know how to do them well. So don't try to do anything that you don't understand, I would say.
Yeah, that's a very important one, because if you don't understand it, you're in the end, the execution of your strategy is going to determine your EV, right? Not the actual strategy. So if you try to follow a solver strategy,
Yes.
but you don't understand it, or you don't understand a certain combo that goes into a certain sizing or certain line, you will butcher the hand on later streets. So it's better to play a strategy that you understand, and especially also on the flop, that you understand the consequences this will have on turn and river, so you execute it correctly. That's way more important. And I thought a very, very important point that people should indeed take away is think about what your hand is worth and try to get the right amount of money in. That also kind of prevents you. Let's say, for example, you checked flop, check turn, and your opponent block bets. You know, it's like, no, my hand is worth a little bit more money, so I should raise the river, for example, right? You said the middle pair, but if you played it in a check line, you will find the raise river because you notice, hey, my hand is worth a little bit more money. So I thought that was that was very good advice.
Yeah, I think it also often helps to understand the chaos that happens when you look at PO solver. Like if you think about check raising ranges and PO solver check raises middle pair, and it makes no sense. Why would you do that? If you think, middle pair is worth about one bet, but it appreciates some protection, so maybe you sacrifice a bit, you get the protection. You're like, okay, so this is a line that makes sense for middle pair to go into. We do it sometimes. And then if our opponent keeps betting, we're in the shitty spot that you can't avoid with medium strength hands sometimes, right? Like if he puts in too much money, middle pair is not worth very much.
Yeah, also from a mental game perspective, I think this is important to understand that some spots are just close to zero EV, and that's just it, right? And often longest discussions are made around the zero EV spot, where the truth is, if you go right or left, either way, it's probably going to be close anyway. But people just want they want that concrete answer, right? And I think it's very important what you said is to realize you're not going to get it. A lot of spots are just going to be close to zero EV, and maybe indeed you can squeeze out a read that makes it a little bit more of a plus EV call or plus EV fold, whatever. But accepting that that's going to be the nature of the spot and sort of play in line with that, I think it's very important.
For sure, and kind of look for the plus EV spots. Like don't spend all your time studying zero EV spots. Like you said, you can fold 6-5 against OTB. That's a plus EV fold. If you keep looking at bluff catching situations and keep thinking about blockers that are worth half a big blind in a 200 big blind pot, you're not improving as a poker player in a relevant way to making money.
So a lot of good advice, which also brings me to the fact that I know that you do coaching. What made you start giving coaching? You mentioned that at some point someone paid you $50 for an hour, so there it was purely financial. But I mean, you've been in coaching with your site, Gorilla Poker. You've run a CFP. You're still running the CFP. What brought you into coaching? What attracts you to coach other players?
So I think, I was working part-time as a math tutor and an English tutor as I was studying in university. So I knew I enjoyed teaching. And I always, when I started coaching random guys, which like you said, was from a purely for financial reasons, like just the excitement of getting paid $50 an hour and realizing that, like, hey, I can make a living doing this thing. and then later getting paid more than $50 an hour was a really big thing in the beginning. And what happened at some point was that someone who had a friend called Avi or Abraham approached me through a mutual friend, and he was on an extended downswing, and he was looking for help, and we discussed could we do some long-term arrangement. And at the point where I was in my poker understanding, I kind of had the feeling that I could help anyone become a winner. You know what I mean? Like I know the things that you need to know and you need to execute. So if of course I did not know the range of people that you could coach in retrospect. Obviously, I couldn't help anyone become a winner, but that was how I felt back then. And then when we started doing long-term coaching, I thought it made sense to have a slightly larger group. So we started with, I think we started with 3 guys, and we were just like I was coaching them, but in a way we were studying together as well, because as I was coaching, like when you coach long term, you are not. This is a big difference between long term coaching and short term coaching. That when you do short term coaching, very often you're teaching everyone the same types of things in the first few hours. But when you do long term coaching and you've already worked with someone for 10 hours, the next hours you're working on much deeper parts of the game, and it helps you to improve a lot more as well. And so coaching for profit, I think, is one of the things that developed my game the most, because I was forced to constantly, I have to keep teaching these guys new things. We've been working together, 6 hours a week for a year, and I still need to teach them new things. So we keep kind of digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think, for me, I enjoy studying with other people more than I enjoy studying alone. I feel like something about having a dialogue and having feedback. So, yeah, I guess it got started that way. The first guy who joined Avi did really, really well immediately, because he was a super talented guy. He just, some people lose their way in some point, especially, PO Solver coming out. You start implementing everything wrong, and even if you have a knack for the game, that could easily destroy your win rate. So you point, if you find the right people, you point them in the right direction, they tend to do well fairly fast. So yeah, I met a bunch of cool guys doing that. Really fun stuff. I know you used to, or do you still have coaching for profit? I'm not sure.
We used to, yeah.
And you stopped because it was too much work, I guess.
Yeah, too intensive. But this is also because of my character. Basically, when someone would come in, I would say, okay, I'm going to do everything in my power in order to make you succeed. Failing was basically not an option. So I engaged myself that much that it became a bit too much for me. So that's why I took a step back, basically, to think about myself a little bit more than constantly thinking for others.
Yeah. I mean, for me, coaching for profit, I think, was not the highest dollar EV thing that I could do at any point. I was never, charging as much as other groups, or there was never like a volume requirement or anything like that. Always kind of trusted people to play as much as is appropriate for them, because it's their life. And, if you play when you don't want to play, I'm not sure it's a good idea. But, I met a lot of interesting people, good connections, learned lots of things working together. And I think in poker, just having a community and having feedback and talking to players at a similar level is so useful that, yeah, I don't know. I think coaching is just a very, very has always been a very positive experience for me, just forcing me to think about things on a deeper level. And also, like, watching people who you've coached succeed is an amazing feeling. Watching them not succeed is less.
You mentioned seeing people not succeed, and you also mentioned that you cannot help everyone. Why do you think some people? You also mentioned some people just lose their way. Why do you think some people in your CFP, in your experience, for example, why didn't some of your students succeed?
I mean, in the end, like we were saying, poker is it's a competitive endeavor. So there are a bunch of things that you need in order to succeed. One of them is being able to handle swings and kind of stay stable emotionally, execute correct decisions, and have good thought processes. And there was a guy I knew who I worked with who went through a divorce as he was playing poker and went on a big downswing, and he was not able to recover from that. And so there, I think there's the emotional aspect. There's also, some guys. You guys know. I know you guys had Tobias on the podcast. So Tobias was one of the first guys in our group, but he was obviously more talented than the previous guys before him. And some guys, when you like, they felt like I was a good coach, but they see Tobias and they know they can never beat Tobias, so they say, maybe poker's not for me.
They get discouraged. Interesting.
Yeah, some guys get encouraged. They're like, okay, if he can do this, maybe I can do this. But sometimes you're like, okay, like this guy is just sharper than I am. I cannot compete with this guy. So, maybe seeing the people around you being very, very talented can be encouraging, but it can also be discouraging in terms of, you realize this game is tougher than you thought it was. You realize how smart some of the people you're competing against are. And like we said, poker is not for everyone. This is not like the American dream, just work hard enough and you'll succeed. It's very, very competitive. It's a food chain. It's a predatory game. I mean this in the most positive way. Like, not everyone can be an NBA star. And yeah, if you're happy being at a certain place, you can often get there low mid stakes, but not everyone can make it through to high stakes. And I think some people maybe get that illusion shattered, even if maybe they could have made it. Like, I don't know if they could or they couldn't, but they see people around them, working harder, getting things faster, and they just don't want to do it anymore. I imagine, at least.
Yeah, when the belief falls away, when the belief is not there anymore, yeah, why would you? Yeah, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Because there's so much variance also. Like, the guy who taught me how to play, who is the same guy who I said had the supercomputer brain in Magic the Gathering. He's the guy who got me into poker, and he was an amazing poker player. But his first year playing poker, he ran 100K under EV. He had like a huge, and this is the first year. Like, this is really huge. Imagine during this year, he wins $60,000 and he should win $160,000. And he was constantly taking these bad beats and suckouts and all these things on the river and losing with his aces to kings all the time. And he couldn't take it. He didn't enjoy it. So even your ability to, I think I've heard some good players say this, that part of being a successful poker player is being lucky enough that the big downswing doesn't come during your first 2 years, but comes later when you're stronger and then are able to handle it. Because if you start out and the huge, I think I had a friend who ran 200 buy-ins over EV over the course of a year, and he went through that. He kept playing it. It was insane to watch. He's still playing up until this day, but not a lot of people are able to handle something like that. So there's even just being able to handle the variance and being lucky enough that the variance comes at the correct time. I think like that there are so many things going on. The support network, like, does your partner support you playing poker? Do your parents and your family and your friends support you playing poker? Can have a big effect on how you handle these types of things. And I even had a friend who was, he succeeded playing poker. He was doing well, but he never wanted to play poker, like, for his entire life. It was he was doing it while he was in college, and when he finished, he went and got his dream job as a computer programmer. So opposite of me, but yeah, I don't know, like
I mean, in
various
the end,
types
you
of
both
guys.
succeeded, right? You both got your dream job.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
But yeah, the variance is pretty insane. I remember also a friend of mine who then showed, I think was a couple years ago, he had a 1 million year, and he looked, and if you looked at his win rates per stakes, he ran, I think he was 100k below EV on 2k. So that's quite like 50 buy-ins below EV on 2k, and he ran super hot on 5k
Yeah.
plus. Imagine if that's the opposite. So he won 1 million, and maybe then
That
you
was
would have
my
only won like 200k.
friend. My friend was the opposite. He ran 50 binds over EV at 1, 2, and 2, 4. Moved up and then ran, 40 binds under EV at 10, 20, and 25, 50.
And especially at that stake, it's even worse, because the compound effect of that shot working out or not working out is so insane. It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another big thing that I saw in RCFP is why students fail is financial stress. I think if you play poker under financial stress, it's just killing. You will lose your joy for the game. You'll become very result oriented. Bad beats are going to hurt you way less. You will get into a negative spiral. So, especially earlier on in your career, being smart with your finances so you don't get into much financial stress, I think is so key for your career to actually have a chance to lift off and become a success. Also, a very big thing that I usually see is way too big swings in confidence. Basically, their confidence swings with the variance. So if they did well, they feel like the best in the world. And that also then impacts how consistent they are in executing their strategy, studying. So due to the swings and due to the confidence that goes with that, they become less consistent. And that, that's going to impact maybe also game selection. They think they're better than they are because of short-term variance. So seeing the world, or seeing your where you are now more objectively and not having it go up and down, is also very important. I'm sure you work with a lot of students, Adam, that go with these ups and downs in confidence with the variance.
Yeah, I would say I've worked with a lot of players who have been struggling to deal with poker downswings. And yeah, it's one of those skills where it's really hard as a poker player to not be attached to your results. And like you said, if you throw in that kind of variable of financial pressure and you're playing poker all day, you haven't got much of a life outside of poker, it becomes this real, almost like pressure pot where your results become your life. And yeah, a lot of players who I work with have points of their career where they'll hit a downswing or their results aren't going their way and their life just unravels. And what I've definitely experienced with players who have a lot more success, they find a way to detach themselves from their results enough that they can see their results are just a sample size. It's just variance. There's this objectivity with their results. And that's there's so many skills that come into that. There's a skill of perspective to see the bigger picture. There's a skill of emotional regulation that needs to come in so you can regulate your emotions in real time. There's, like Uri talked about, having your life in balance, having a good family set up. It's being good with money so you're not under pressure. So there's a huge cocktail of just solving one problem about being attached to results that, yeah, I think a lot of players would neglect this area until it hits breaking point, or they just haven't developed the skills throughout their career to deal with adversity, in all honesty. So one of the skills I try to help players build is resilience, because almost no matter what career you have, even though someone like Uri's had a very linear career with not as many setbacks as most players, you have to learn to deal with adversity. Like, you have to build a level of resilience in yourself so you can overcome tough times. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons I think why players struggle with downswings and results, but yeah, it's definitely a skill set, various skill sets that you need to come together to kind of solve that problem. So yeah, I want to quickly transition to, I know Yuri's talked about some of the kind of strategy aha moments you had. I think there was 3 technical points of your career where you had big breakthroughs. I'd like to know if there was any life lessons that poker has taught you. You could look back on your poker career. Is there any like valuable life lessons you've learned on your journey?
Yeah, quite a few, I think. Quite a few. I think one let me think. So I think that the way that you think about poker hands is the thought process that I've applied to real life, where when you think about the river and you think about a combo and you're like, he would not have bet that size on the turn with this combo, so that's not in his range. So you use an analytical thought process about the situation by thinking of the context of everything that led to the situation. And you can use this in real life to kind of solve all sorts of puzzles, even relationship puzzles. Like, maybe some people do it in a more intuitive way, but I think I've been able to use kind of the poker problem-solving process in various areas in my personal life to understand what's going on at kind of a deeper level. I think that's one. The second one has to do with the way I think about money. And how I say I'm risk averse, but I can only say that amongst poker players, right? Like to any non-poker player, the amounts of risk in my life, in my investment portfolio, everything are insane and hard to imagine for a normal person. Just the way the poker lifestyle works, where I sometimes think of poker as a job like people go through these emotional swings in other jobs, but probably like 1,000 times more slowly. Like you will have a project that you do in your job over 6 months, and then if it does badly, maybe it's just variance, but then you might be tilted, and then the next project you might start it out a bit worse and do worse. You'll be angry, you won't use the same thought processes, but everything is at a human pace. And when you play poker, you just lose this huge pot. Imagine you're like a surgeon operating and your patient dies, and then you're like, okay, next patient, go. Next patient, go. Like it never stops. It's a really, maybe I'm not answering your question anymore. I'm just associatively talking, but it's a really insane job. The types of skills and mental stamina that you develop, I think they are relevant. They help you everywhere. They really help you, like when things go wrong, when you don't perform well. Like if I make a mistake somewhere, some people beat themselves up over mistakes, or like there are people I know who, when they have to give it a lecture or go on an interview, they're super stressed for weeks and months. And poker is such a high stress environment, and you have to learn to deal with that. I think it just develops a skill set that is very, very useful. Like I imagine if I were going to study something and I fail at a test, I'm not going to be too hard on myself. I'm going to be able to handle that very easily. And poker, you have to be able to handle failure. You have to be able to handle uncertainty. So like if I'm going to buy a new car, I'm not sure it's the best car. Maybe I'm making a bad decision. I can live with risk very, very well in all aspects of my life. During coronavirus, a lot of people who are not used to thinking about risk of infection do crazy, irrational things. For some guys, it makes sense. For some guys, like if you're 80 years old, obviously it's different than if you're 20 years old, the kind of risks you should be taking. But poker kind of, I think, trains you to be able to look at everything and integrate it and understand the risks, and then come to the best decision that you're able to. It's kind of automatic, right? Like this is what we do at work every day. So when an investment opportunity comes up, I don't need it to be 100%. I know what questions to ask, and just general all around. Poker has a ton of life skills inside, and you're just turbocharged. You're like living life at 100x pace, and emotionally learning these things, mentally learning these things. I think it's super useful. Or sometimes it breaks you and you run away. Right? Not everyone's built for it.
Yeah, I think like you said, poker is one of those things where things happen at fast pace and you've almost got to learn quickly. If you don't learn quickly, poker is not going to be very forgiving for you. So yeah, there's almost like two skills simultaneously there at the end where you talked about the ability to handle risk and to accept risk and to quantify risk in various scenarios. And then there's the skill of dealing with the consequences of failure when things go wrong, when your dreams don't get realized. And at the poker tables, it's almost like a daily occurrence where emotions that you've never had to deal with. So if I look at my life pre-poker, my emotional state, I could avoid most of my emotions, almost always. I could find something to do that would allow me to not have to handle my emotional states. At the poker tables, good luck. Good luck hiding from all the uncertainty, all the self-doubt. You've got to learn that skill of these emotions are coming up. You're going to have to learn that skill of dealing with your emotions, or poker's not going to fit for you. So yeah, I always like chatting to players like yourself who've been in poker a long time, because you've had to develop that skill. If not, there'd just be no way that you'd be enjoying this process of being a poker player at this stage. So yeah, I liked all those skills. We talked about problem solving and the ability to basically think ahead and holistically about decision making in a wide range of scenarios. You talked about money, even though you're generally a risk averse person, but in the poker context, you've learned how to manage money and manage risk. And then we talked about risk and consequences in a broader context. And like you said, with COVID, a lot of people making ridiculously irrational decisions for us poker players who could just say, okay, these are the options, these are the probabilities. Let's just choose an option and be okay with it. A lot of irrational kind of, I guess, thought processes and emotions coming up around those times in people's lives. So yeah, really, really good skills. I'm glad you shared those. So next question is there anything you would do different in your poker career? We could go back maybe to a certain point. Is there anything looking back on your career so far you would do differently?
Yes. I was like, my first instinct was to say no, because I'm happy with where I am, and if you change something, you don't know where you end up. But I think the number one thing I would have done differently is been more organized about taxes. I think a lot of poker players, you start out, it's a hobby, you're making a low amount of money, and if you transition to making more, and you're slow about dealing with it with accountants, it just, the complexity of the problem grows the longer you wait. So one big thing I would have done is take that more seriously earlier. Like it's all fine, everything's sorted, it was not a big deal, but it was pretty stressful. It's a lot easier to do your taxes in advance than to do them a few years late. Let's put it that way. So I think for anyone aspiring to be a professional, figure out the tax laws, figure out how it's going to work. When you're making 1K a month, you don't need to pay taxes, but very often things escalate quickly in poker. So something to think about. And kind of in terms of how my career progressed, I think that I think it's hard to separate everything from like my personal development, my emotional development. So obviously, in retrospect, there are a bunch of tips I would have given myself. I would have, done better, handled things easier, but you just sometimes have to learn things the hard way. And you were saying in the beginning, like, I had everything planned in terms of being risk averse. I didn't have anything planned. I was just risk averse, right? I was just scared, so I didn't move up. It was not part of a plan. And yeah, I think one of the big issues, one of the big disadvantages with poker for me is that poker is all the time at the computer at this kind of fast pace. And I have a bit of a computer game addiction. I'm called, like, you can call it an addiction or not an addiction, but poker and spending so many hours at the computer made me often take breaks by playing other computer games. And I think in retrospect, that probably hurt me quite a lot in a number of ways, even in terms of just kind of being able to recover from whatever is happening in poker, because you don't want to feed your brain new information. You want to let it process and let it rest. So I think, like, if we're talking about mental game coaching, I wish I would have gotten more mental game coaching earlier than I did. As soon as I did, it had a big impact. I think my first 2 hours with Jared, which cost a lot of money for me at the time, but I can't stress how valuable that type of work can be for a poker player. It's really hard to quantify, but just the effect that having more stable confidence has on the quality of your life and the quality of your decisions is yeah, can't say how big that is, but yeah, I guess one more thing in retrospect, maybe because I have a family now and I can't be a degen and travel to live stops and MTTs and stuff like that. Maybe I would have done that a bit more earlier on, because now it's so much harder to manage. And there is this, when you're young and single and no responsibilities, it feels like you have infinite time to do everything. But if you think of your life, just like we think of like poker as one long session, so your life is one long session, uh, you're not always going to have an abundance of time and freedom to do whatever you want. So like, had I been more aware of that and managed my time more effectively and played, it's sad to say, I love playing computer games. I played too much computer games during those years for sure. And yeah, would have changed the balance a bit in those respects. It's not very poker strategy heavy, what I'm saying, but yeah, those are my introspective thoughts, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to look back, and especially when you're in a position that you're happy with, it's sometimes hard to like look back and change things because everything was a process to get you to where you are now. It's hard to like kind of differentiate the process of learning to get to where you are, and then things you could have done differently. Yeah, some of the ones you came up with there were sorting your taxes. I think overall being responsible for your finances as a poker player. Rene, I know you had to learn the hard way. I was the same. It's one of those things that we just get thrown into. All of a sudden, you've got lots of money, which you're not used to having, and you often make bad decisions, don't pay your taxes, put yourself in situations that could have been avoided with a little bit of financial competency, in all honesty. So yeah, I think learn the skill of managing your finances as a poker player with the assumption that you're gonna have a lot of money one day. Like don't go in there broke thinking, okay, I'm not gonna pay taxes, who cares? Go in there thinking, okay, I want to have a lot of money, so let's start thinking about a system in advance that's going to allow me to generate a lot of wealth. And then you talked about your addiction to games and potentially that taking away some of your time to travel and maybe play some live poker. So yeah, maybe a balancing effect that you needed to learn over time. And then your mental game, working on mental game coaches, and yeah, basically putting time into fixing your leaks that are costing you the most money. For you, it was building confidence and trying to separate that gap between your A game and C game, which we've talked about. So yeah, great stuff. All right, so going into the present day, you've just launched your course with Upswing Poker. Talk us through the process of creating the course and why now? Why now to release that course?
So I started with my YouTube page and website, Gorilla Poker, I think about 2 years ago, and it's been again kind of a slow process because I'm doing it at the same time as I'm doing a lot of other things. So I'm not doing advertising, I'm not creating too much content. So everything's kind of been low key. And when Upswing, when Doug approached me about doing a course, I thought it was just a great business opportunity for me. They're very professional, have very big reach, so I get to reach a much larger audience, and Upswing have a history of making like long courses, like 25, 30-hour courses, which I never imagined I'd be able to make. So they kind of helped me think about the subject and understand that it is possible to make a course of that length, which I didn't think I would be able to at the beginning. And yeah, kind of the process for me, because I've done so much coaching, once I understood kind of the structure of what I want to talk about, it's all stuff I've talked about a million times. So once you have the structure and you have enough experience, making the course was actually very, very easy. Yeah, I'm super excited how people like it. Like I said, I'm reaching a larger audience than I used to. I know that Rene, you probably know this too. Most poker content out there is with a different focus than our approach, and not to say it doesn't work. It's just a different. There are many ways to climb the same mountain, and I think this is like a big exposure for the exploitative approach that not a lot of people that are not in a CFP will ever really learn about or think about these kind of thought processes, like you were mentioning. Even like pre-flop in the course, I give people charts, and then I keep telling them, like, never ever follow the chart. If you're following the chart, you're doing it wrong. Yeah, so um, yeah, I think it just kind of led up to that. So kind of by accident in terms of timing, but yeah, really excited to see how it's received by everyone.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. It sounds like a very similar path to Rene, who did the CFP, did a lot of coaching with students, and the natural kind of progression is to make a course for more people. It sounds like your mind was already full of ideas, and you just need a little bit of guidance to structure those ideas. And yeah, I'm sure the course will be a very big hit. And what can we expect from you going forward? Are you going to be doing YouTube content? I know you mentioned your channel. What can we expect from you going forward right now?
I'm not sure. It's tough. There are so many things in poker I want to do. I probably keep making YouTube content, but that's like half an hour a week or so. It's not a big part of my time. I'm studying a lot with some really talented people. Starting to learn PLO. Really excited about PLO. It's a fun game. And no, I was always afraid of PLO because of the variance, but I feel like I'm okay to handle it now. Yeah, playing a lot in terms of like what I do going forwards. I really can't tell. It's like I just finished the course. We'll kind of see what happens. Maybe I make another course. Maybe I start playing nosebleed PLO. Maybe I go play live. It's really tough to say. I just like what I love about poker for me is each of the options that I'm saying all sound exciting. So I'm happy kind of any way the ship sails, I'm happy.
I love that. And I get that feel from you that there's many options that you could take right now, but all of them seem very exciting to you. Whether it's making new courses, whether it's playing nosebleeds, whether it's coaching more people, they all seem very in line with your passions. And as we've talked about throughout this conversation, you've loved poker, you've loved your whole poker journey. So yeah, whatever comes next, as long as it fits that need of I enjoy what I'm doing right now, yeah, it's really, really refreshing to hear someone who's so excited about their paths, and there's so many opportunities for you going forward. Great stuff. So, Rene, have you got any further questions that you'd like to throw Uri's way?
No, I think we've talked for quite a while, right? I definitely understand what Uri said. Like creating a course, it's not necessarily once you finally have kind of stripped down what you're gonna say when you're gonna say, then the making it, the recording it is not that hard. But it's like, okay, how will I structure this? What things should I discuss? What are the most important topics? That's kind of the tricky part. And in regards to the exploitive stuff, it's a bit more special, I would say, indeed, and people are a bit more skeptical about talking about it. For example, if I make a YouTube video, or do a Twitch stream, I prefer to just talk GTO-ish because it's broad knowledge. You're not giving away too much. When you really go on the exploitative train, I can go very deep in certain thought processes that are very different than what you will see out there. So it's a bit more, but I save this for special people, right? I save this for our mechanics of poker students. They get to know that, and I think that's yeah, that's kind of how it is. And indeed, that usually is reserved for CFP. So it's good that it now is becoming a bit more mainstream.
I will say, like, when making the course, I had this kind of thought that if I describe an exploit in a big course, then kind of you kill the exploit, right? It doesn't work anymore because everyone knows about it, and then you don't have confidence to do it. So in the course, I mostly, I think I teach how to go about building your own exploits more than I teach a specific exploit. I get people into the frame of mind and give them the tools so that when they study on their own, they're building exploits, they're thinking about things in this kind of way. And yeah, definitely when playing online, you can't play exploitative at serious stakes and stream it everywhere. That's like suicide, I feel, for your game.
Yes, that's not a great idea, right? The costs are too big then. We do the same. I mean, that's why it's called the mechanics of poker. The focus on the mechanics of exploitation is way more valuable than, oh, here's a sheet of data. Big blind versus EP triple barrel gets bluffed 24%. It's like, okay, memorize this. Yeah, that's not really useful, right? And these things change. So everything that we try to make in the mechanics, I try to make as timeless as possible by really focusing on broader concepts. It's like, oh, how do you find an exploit? How does a range imbalance being how can I explain this? What is like the range construction error that leads to an overbluff spot, underbluff spot? These are way more valuable concepts than just saying like, oh, do this exploit here. Oh, always bluff catch here. Oh, this is the percentage the population bluffs in this spot. So way more timeless approaches. So I'm a big fan of that.
I'd love to study with you sometime if you still do that.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm always up for it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Any last things you still want to add to the pot?
Let me think. So first, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Really enjoyed the call. It's fun to find someone like you. Like we said, it sounds like we think about things very similarly. So not too much. Usually you have to qualify exploitative thought processes a bit more. People have this inner objection, like how can you fold it if it's in the chart? How can you bluff if it's minus EV? What if the other guy does this? I think we're both on the
Yeah.
I have this metaphor where, like, imagine you're floating in the sea and GTO is like your life raft and you're holding on to it and you think, as long as I hold on to this, no one can hurt me and I'm safe. And exploitative poker, like, you let go, you learn to actually swim, and you learn like how the game actually works. And like, you can play your entire game holding a life raft, but that it's not much fun. It gets boring. You get the same view all the time. While the style that we both teach and we both play, poker is such a creative game. You can never get bored. You keep enjoying it and being creative and having fun. And kind of a never-ending process. Like, every day you can find new things. Every hand is interesting. It's never like, oh, this play is standard or that play is standard. Oh, not never, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just fun talking to you guys. Like you were saying, I have a new course out on Upswing, Elite Cash Game Exploits. Anyone who's interested, check it out. I think it's really good. But and yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that was a nice conversation. I always end in the same ways, right? Oh, what a lot of knowledge. What a wisdom bomb has been dropped upon us. And every time it's the same. This time even longer than normal, but that was just because our guest was just feeding us with good information. And me and Adam were talking, we could hop on a call tomorrow and do a part 2 of another 3 hours, because I listed a bunch of questions that I didn't even get to ask. So if people liked this podcast, then maybe in the future we'll take a part 2. What were some of the things that really stand out for you, Adam?
Well, where to begin after that 3-hour marathon of knowledge? I'd say one of the first things that came to mind for reflection was how much Uri thinks about balance in his life. And he's very particular of trying to create the life circumstances that allow him to perform well. He talked about having like kind of polar opposite games that can show up. One way is like a plus 15 winner and a minus 10 loser. And when you've got that kind of variability in your game, you need to pay a lot of attention to creating the life circumstances, whether that's sleep quality, stress management, so you show up as your best self. It sounds like over the years, he's got better and better at that skill set and find that balance so he can show up as his best self more often. He also talked about spotting a lot of the tendencies that show up. And for him, he's talked about it one way. He said, if he doesn't want to pay his bills, then he shouldn't be playing poker. Me and Rene both thought we would never play because paying our bills never seems interesting, or doing the taxes, whatever. So yeah, I think it's finding unique things for you, but it's obviously for him, he knows a certain state of mind would lead to bad performance. So he's aware of that going in. Next thing we talked about was, or next thing that came up for me was risk aversion, and very interesting how he even kind of talked about this in the poker context. You can only talk about being risk averse to non-poker players, really. To poker players, really. But his ability to navigate to high stakes whilst being very risk averse. And as we could see, as we went through the kind of story arch, there wasn't many big setbacks. He didn't have a 30, 40, 50 buying downswing. He didn't have to rebuild his role because he built his kind of progression around being a risk-averse personality. So a lot of that, it was a slow journey. It cost him opportunity cost of playing higher earlier, but he knew he couldn't tolerate high risk. So he designed, almost like subconsciously originally, but he designed a path that was a low variance. So he was able to navigate a high-risk environment like poker with a low-risk tolerance. So if you're someone who has a low-risk tolerance, you could maybe listen to the parts of Uri speaking about that to get some tips on how to approach poker with a risk-averse approach. And then finally, mental game. You give a big shout out to Jared Tendler and working on his mindset, and basically said for himself, working on building confidence has been one of the biggest things for his win rates. And again, as we talked about, he's a very exploitative, intuitive player. He thinks very, very deeply about spots. And when that's firing, amazing. He's got an awesome win rate. When that's not firing, he's almost like spewing off. So with that in mind, he's very susceptible to these big swings in his game, this big variation. So the mental game is going to be huge for him, and his ability to stay confident in his players and show up as his best self during his grind is going to be huge. So yeah, a million other things. I've literally got probably 13 other topics I could have talked about, but they're the main ones for me. How about yourself, Rene? How would you summarize your main findings from Uri?
Yeah, I mean, we rambled a lot about strategic poker, right? And it was mainly rambling. For me now, it's a bit of a big blur. But there was a lot of knowledge in there for sure. You also talked a lot about networking, right? About getting the right amount of people, the right people around him. Also from a strategic perspective, I think he also mentioned like, being told on which sides to play. A good side opportunity came up, and because of his network, he had first choice to go play on that side, for example, when the games were still good. I loved the everyone is a fish example. And I think almost all players have had that. When you move up to a new stage, you think, well, here they're very good. But he generally gives people just very little credit, right? He even says, I'm a fish as well. So I think that was a very interesting one. And in the end, he really talked about exploitive play. What did he say? Right, he's in the ocean, and you hold on to this to this life jacket or whatever, to this floating device. But when you try to swim, that's when you learn exploitive poker. And he mentioned the two words. Then you can express your creativity, and then it's a lot of fun. And these are two values that I hold highly as well in poker. And just in general, the building strategies. I love the magic example. And even my mind went like, oh, wow, how cool is that? So people play a certain deck, and now you're going to try to put the deck together that counters that deck. I haven't played Magic in years, but immediately I felt sort of a spark inside me that was like, oh, cool, to develop a strategy like that. So yeah, really grateful to have him on. Really grateful as well that he invited me to do a study session together. So let's see if a little poker bromance comes out of this podcast. The exploitative guys hanging out together. So that would be great. Yeah, and I want to thank everyone. If you made it to the end, #dedication, right? 3 hours of listening. But given the amount of knowledge that was in this pod, I'm sure it flew by, or at least for me personally, it didn't feel like 3 hours at all. It was like, oh fuck, we're already at 3 hours. Shit, we have to wrap it up. As always, guys, much appreciated that you have joined in, and see you in the next episode. Now, if you learned something in this episode, we would much appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Leave a comment with your main takeaways, give us a 5-star rating, and follow the pod. This way we can reach more players and help them reach their big and ambitious poker goals. And if you want us to help you get to those goals, go over to pokerambition.com to find out more.